Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a special edition of the Cup Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your co-artistic producer, Mackenzie, and we are joined by a fantastic panel, including our other co-artistic producer, Mr. Ryan Barakovich. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. It is a hot one out there, hence why there is no suit jacket today. I was like, I am not wearing a suit under these lights. Screw that. And then we are also joined by our associate producer, Ms. Jillian Robinson. Hello, Jill.
Hello, Mackenzie. How goes it?
It goes. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we are doing a very special episode for you where we are covering all the shows we saw at the Toronto Fringe Festival 2022. Yes, we were able to go back and see the Fringe this year in person. And so Ryan, Jill, and I decided to split up and go on our merry adventures and see as many shows as we could. I saw 6, Jill, you saw 5, and Ryan saw 10, bringing our grand total
13, actually.
Oh, and I think I ended up seeing 7.
Jill and I saw a couple together that overlapped, so the count doesn't quite work out. But either way, we saw a bunch of shows. We saw a lot.
The more the merrier.
23
in total.
23.
23. Yeah. 23 shows is what we saw. So we will be breaking down each of these shows. We'll be giving some insights into what we thought, and then we'll be giving our final thoughts at the very end. We'll make a huge bravo to Fringe 2022. So buckle in, people. We will have chapter times in this episode, so you can jump around if you're wanting to find a show that you also saw. You want to compare notes. We can certainly have that there for you, so you'll definitely want to take a look at that. This is also a spoiler warning for you, as well as there are some shows we will have to spoil a bit of the plot and twists to kind of show the piece, but we'll try our best to kind of keep some things under wraps as well. But
yeah, that's the fun of doing it after the fact, that we don't have to worry about. This isn't a word of mouth generating exercise. This is a review for posterity.
Correct. Exactly. Well, before we start, Ryan, what is in your cup?
Coffee. I have coffee in the cup. And in case you were going to ask about my ensemble, I have my Tip the Fringe pin here, which has a little unicorn on it. So that's fun too. Always tip the Fringe. Remember, 100% of proceeds go to the artist. So if you want the Fringe to survive, you have to tip.
That's true. Jill, what is your ensemble and what is your drink?
I'm drinking coffee as well. I'm just going to say it from the get-go, I have a bit of a scrambled egg brain today, folks. This summer has been a hoot and a holler, but lots of pivoting around the country, doing theater. So I'm very grateful, but I am in between. I have one foot in Ontario, one foot in Calgary right now. So I have coffee, keeping me wired and fueled. And I'm just wearing a cute little summer sundress. Quite honestly, I was scrambling to get here today. So I was like, let's pick something I have never worn on the cup. So it's my cute little 1950s sundress. And I'm feeling great. I'm feeling reinvigorated and energized being here, guys. So thank you for pepping my step again.
Love it. And tonight I have what did I have? I have orange grapefruit lemonade. So there we go.
Fruity.
Very fruity. Okay, well, let's dive in because we got a lot to cover. So first off, we're going to throw it to Ryan and Jill with a show called Wanda. Not WandaVision, not Wanda Maximoff from MCU, Wanda. And this is from the Burgundy Dragon Company. So Ryan and Jill, feel free to start talking about this fantastic piece that you guys got to go and see.
Okay. Would you like
Ryan,
to
go ahead. Okay. No, take the reins, Ryan. Yeah.
All right. Wanda is a fun, how do they describe it in the program? Calm dram in that order. And it does live up to that title, although I think they're maybe kind of underselling the calm part, because I really felt like it was definitely one of the funniest shows I saw this year at the Fringe. I have the program right here. It's very fun, very colorful. The play is written by Ethan Rickman, who, Jill, I believe you know from theater school. Is that correct?
I do. Yeah, that's correct.
And he co-directed it with Zachary Barmania. I hope I'm pronouncing all these names correctly. And it is starring Zaina Khalif in the titular role of Wanda, as well as Jessica Harb as Faith, and Ethan Rickman himself as Logan. So a very strong three-hander. And this is a piece that I kind of maybe don't want to spoil too about because, and I might say this a few times over this review, but there are certain pieces, especially like very well structured and well written plays, that I do indeed hope have an afterlife after the festival. So if that is the case, then I don't necessarily want to get too deep into spoilers in case people happen to see this before they see it at another theater. But I thought this was a very strong comedy, romantic comedy, but there was definitely highs and lows, which is where the dramatic part comes in. And yeah, to, I guess, talk very lightly and non-spoiler about the plot, we have our main character is Wanda, as the title suggests, and she's in a relationship with Logan. And Logan is doing his PhD in gender studies, or women in gender studies, at University of Toronto, and he has developed an infatuation with one of his classmates in that program named Faith, played by Jessica Harb. And Faith is also recently become best friends or very close friends with Wanda, so hijinks ensues as this love triangle type situation unfolds. And yeah, it's really funny from beginning to end. This is a very sharply written script. It's funny, I'll show you in the program here, we have this image here of our three actors, and it's recreating the very famous meme image. For those listening to this as a podcast, I'll try to describe it, but we have one female character here, the man who's with his partner turning back his head like, damn, and then the partner's like, what? We've all seen memes like this before. And it's funny because while this is a very humorous image, I actually feel like it kind of maybe sells a very different idea of the comedy in this show than what we actually get. It's not really meme humor, or doesn't really feel like the type of humor that you expect from something that uses meme iconography to sell it. It's very witty, urbane, and like intelligent humor. It's kind of similar to the way that people used to describe Woody Allen movies back when people used to like talking about Woody Allen movies. And I think, yeah, it's just, again, I've used the word sharp a few times already, but that's the best way I could put it. It's just very sharp, intelligent, good humor that really does hit hard when it needs to, but then comes out very strong at the end. Jill, I've been talking for a while. You want to say anything about it since you saw it too?
No, it's okay. You are taking the words right out of my brain as well. I concur with Ryan. This was one of the funniest pieces I got a chance to see. And I do want to specifically shout out to Zaina Khalif. I've said this several times to Ryan, percolating. It's one of the shows you percolate on too. Like I catch myself thinking back on Wanda, which you always love a show that kind of does that for you, gives you all these afterthoughts. And Zaina Khalif's acting, I thought, was incredible. And it was so different. Like it was a different display of acting. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think it had to do obviously with the character she was playing too, but just she kind of went against like traditional sort of gesture archetypes of what you think her character would do. She would play it differently. So I felt myself kind of hypnotized by her work, which was super neat. I think it added like a cool flavor to the piece at whole. And then also kind of on top of that, talking about the piece in whole, this same sort of vibe. Like I felt like I was on the edge of my seat always of like, where is the story going to go? Where is it going to pivot? Right? Like who's going to end up with who? There's some moments where some characters, again, I don't want to spoil too much, but you think like they're maybe getting closer or more intimate, but then the scene changes, or you expect something to happen, but then the complete opposite happens. And it just was a slice of like surreal reality. It's hard to like,
definitely heightened
reality. Yeah. And like, I will admit, not every single morsel of the piece sort of fit well for me, but as a whole, it was like extremely strong. So I'm just super excited to see if this piece gets life in more stages. And if it's one of those pieces too that I would go back and see again, because I think I would get a different glance or glean at some of the material. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I could jump off some of that, like I know I said, don't want to spoil it too much, but I think just to get a little more specific into some things, I do think one thing that I will say is, like you mentioned, Jill, briefly, that you thought, oh, where's this going? Certain different characters end up together than what you expect. Mm-hmm. And I do kind of want to say that I also had those thoughts. And a part of me is kind of thinking that I wonder what this piece would have been if it went in maybe different, slightly less heteronormative directions. Mm-hmm. Which, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with. You can have like a straight couple love triangle romance. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And, straight people are allowed to have romantic comedy hijinks too. Just because, we're thankfully seeing more things with queer relationships doesn't mean that there's not a place for that. I do kind of think that maybe, I guess this is interesting because the character of Logan, played by Ethan Rickman, who is both our playwright and our co-director, I found him very unlikable, which I don't think is a fault of the piece because, but I think it does come down to the fact that periodically I was questioning what do both of the ladies like about him so much. And I think that's part of what maybe does foster this idea of, oh, might the two ladies end up together? And will that be an interesting direction for this? And when that doesn't happen, spoiler, we warned you all that this might happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I just wonder, what is the way that this is, because it does very much frame itself as a feminist deconstruction of rom-com tropes, and yet ultimately does still end up, the man being torn between these two women, and he kind of gets his way in the end, which is interesting. And perhaps if we talk to these artists about the show later, we might dig more deep into this. Exactly. Possible foreshadowing, ominously so.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think we can wrap up Wanda right there.
Yeah,
hopefully, I hope this piece gets more life. And as I said, I would come back and see it again and again. And yeah, I look forward to it. Congratulations to the whole team of Wanda.
I concur.
Love it. Okay. Well, I guess over to me for my first review of the day, which is the show called Get a Dog, which was presented by Wise Girl Productions. And it was written by Jonathan Klein, directed by Amanda Cordiner, and it starred Andrew Puraru and was supposed to have the actress Fatima Jubadu. I apologize if I butchered that last name, which I'm sure I did, but there's a twist here. Fatima had lost her voice, and instead of canceling the show, their stage manager, Alex Verge, stepped in with 24 hours notice to take on this other part of this two-hander piece. And basically it's all set around this therapy session between this very rich person who is in search of why they've lost their love for making money. And basically it's this back and forth tete-a-tete headstrong therapy session that goes on. And literally the stage manager stepped in with 24 hours notice to fill the role. And I didn't realize it at first, but she was holding a stack of papers in her hand the whole time. And at first I thought it was a prop. She was supposed to be filling out forms on stage. And so I thought, oh, it's that. But then when Andrew took the clipboard and some of the papers still stayed with her, I was like, oh. And Lily, she didn't look at her sheets once. Like she turned the pages subtly, just to make sure she stayed on track, just in case she needed it, but she never needed it. And there was a Q&A afterwards, and they revealed in Q&A that they actually did skip a bit of the dialogue. But Andrew was so good that he actually was able to jump to the next part without missing a beat. And the two actually had really good chemistry for people who had probably maybe had run the lines and maybe a few times backstage before going on. But the fact that two of them did it so well. And I mean, what was also cool during the Q&A was revealed that because Fatima had lost her voice on the weekend, the writer, Jonathan, has stepped into this role of the patient, Margaret, and I guess had taken on a male version of that part, but had also performed the part too. So they were quite a feisty trio of people who were making the show work. And I mean, it was just a very well composed therapy piece. It was very much a tete-a-tete, kind of the battle of wills, kind of like in Princess Bride, where it's the back and forth type situation where you clearly see the power dynamic shifting back and forth, which is really well done in these type of two-hander argument pieces. You really want to see clearly where the power dynamic is fitting. And so the two of them did it really well. So I definitely thoroughly enjoyed it. And even when the situation got a little dry at times, they were so fast to get this situation back up and running again that you never felt a real lull in the conversation because you could tell the minute there was a lull, somebody was already jumping in to send the energy in another direction to give something new to play off of. So it was a very solid, well done two-hander piece. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I give full kudos to their stage manager, Alex, who did probably did the one thing everybody dreads happening, which is you're going on in 24 hours, you learn a whole part in that time, and good luck to you.
It's every actor and anybody behind the table's nightmare.
Yes, exactly.
But we love a good swing. They are the unsung heroes of theater.
True.
Hell yeah.
Snaps to that. So yes, that is my thoughts on Get a Dog. Next we have, right? Exactly. We're moving through these at a good clip. I mean, there's the poster for Get a Dog right behind me there. Which
Mhm.
and I will not reveal whether or not they do get a dog at the end, because that
Oh,
is a
leaving us in
fun,
suspense.
Love it.
ambiguous part of the story that you'll have to find out for yourself if they get a dog. But there we go.
Nice.
All right, next up, we're going back to Ryan with The Boy Who Cried, presented
right.
by Creme de la Creme.
Okay, got the program for it right here. You could also see it behind me. The Boy Who Cried. Okay, it's almost like I chose the running order for this because this was another one of my favorites. So, of course, I wanted to get it out there ahead of the gate. The Boy Who Cried. How do you even begin to describe this piece? Okay, so I will say it's written by Brad Gira, directed by William Dow and Brad Gira, and performed by a murderer's row of actors. I actually didn't even count them in the end, but there's like so many people in this play. And I believe most of the cast crew are all either current or recently graduated University of Toronto students from the undergrad program in theatre at St. George. So that's really fun. So this plot, again, this is another one that I really don't want to spoil because I really do think this piece has a lot of potential and could have an afterlife after the festival. So I will just say that very short version, we're set at a summer camp and we follow this large group of counselors, but specifically our protagonist is one counselor named Sorauren, played by Margaret Rose. And she has come back to this camp year after year. She's like a very type A, always kind of clipboard type in hand. She puts a lot of like passion into her work as a camp counselor. And she has a favorite camper named Jace, who is starting to misbehave and she's not sure why. And let's just maybe leave it at that. And then things go off the rails very quickly. And there's an adult prison nearby this camp that is maybe related to the plot somehow.
This sounds like Doubt.
Not quite Doubt. I think the closest frame of reference I would bring to it is, well, Moonrise Kingdom is the obvious one, but I don't know if that's just because of I'm saying that because of the superficial, relationship of, a summer camp, misbehaving children, kind of things go off the rails. But Wes Anderson, certainly, his style of writing and dialogue, I think definitely does infuse the piece. Nobody talks the way like a normal human talks, but that's not a bad thing. It's not a fault in the writing or the acting. There's just something also very strange and heightened about this, but in a very different way from Wanda. And I kind of loved it. It was like really strange and bizarre, and like you never really knew what was going to happen next. But I was never bored for a second, that's for sure. And things really do go all over the place, crazy ways. At one point, I'll just say, brief spoiler for one scene, there's a character in it named Landon, who's another one of the camp counselors, and he's like this like pompous, basically like the kid in every intro philosophy class who's always raising his hand to correct the prof, that kind of guy. He only loves talking about big ideas. That's like his thing that he says. And at one point, Sorauren and Landon are having a conversation, and she says like, "Are you high?" And he says, "Yep, Quaaludes, you want one?" And she's like, "Okay," and just takes one and pops one. And I felt like that scene was the skeleton key for the entire production, because as soon as you realize just like, yep, this character is high, another character just very easily accepts the Quaaludes without even like batting her eye at it. Like, I kind of feel like that's the vibe that infused this entire piece. And I kind of just want to say, like, there was so many people in this, and I'm pretty sure nobody or almost nobody doubled characters. So I'm just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, too many people. Like there's like easily, and I'm not saying too many like is a bad thing, but yeah, there was a huge cast, and I didn't really feel like all of the characters necessarily got as fully developed as I would have liked. Obviously, we have Sorauren was our main character, and then another character, Harper, was very well developed. Dr. Kelsey, who was the kind of overseer of the camp. But aside from this kind of core cast of like 4 or 5, I don't feel like we got a great handle on all the characters, which is a shame. And I kind of felt like maybe doubling some of the smaller roles would have heightened these roles a little better. There was also maybe just a little too much going on in the plot, which I don't think is necessarily a fault, but it is kind of all over the place. This play clearly has a lot on its mind, but it's also kind of hard to exactly narrow down what that is. And I don't know if the solution is more dramaturgy or just kind of like developing it more and more productions, but there are clear, coherent themes. I'm not trying to undersell like that. There's a lot in here about toxic masculinity, a lot about, the way we discipline children as an extension of how we go on to discipline adults. Really, the fact that we take people and kind of sector them off into these strict gender roles of mommies and daddies from a very young age, that comes up in this play a lot. And yeah, I thought it was a wild Right. And I don't know how much more to say about it than that. If this ever does have another production after this, I highly encourage people to see it because it is quite the trip.
Love it. Love it. All right. On to Jill with
to me.
Phantasmagoria by Near and Far Projects.
Yes. So Phantasmagoria, I'm just going to go out and say it. This was my favorite piece I saw at the Fringe. It is a very different piece than other Fringe shows. I can say that out of the gate. It's a contemporary dance experience. So it was breathtaking. So a choreographer was Tavia Christina, and it's by Near and Far Projects, and Bree Clark also had her hand in the mix. We've seen Bree Mack in Grim Night.
Yes.
She was our opener, and you might see Bree down the line. But anyways, not getting ahead of myself, the cast was phenomenal. So basically, let me kind of break down this stunning experience. So the whole show was contemporary dance, and to sort of like ethereal, sort of indie meets EDM meets ambient music that was just piped through the theater. And there was no verbal or oral language until the very end. And it was sort of just like a meditative hum. And the audience was sort of invited to partake at the end. And then that seized the performance. So the whole time you were just sitting, experiencing, and letting this movement hit you. And I'm someone who I've always been so incredibly moved by contemporary dance. It looks effortless. It's one of those artistic expressions where it's a breath of fresh air and a teardrop in like the same sentence. And it looks like it's done with ease, but I know that it's probably one of the hardest dance genres to tackle because it is so emotionally driven. And I just want to shout out to all of the cast. They were like fully invested physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally throughout that entire piece. I had goosebumps. So basically, let's kind of break down what the piece is about. It's another one of those pieces too, where at the end, it has a sort of a wide branch of people questioning sort of the bridge between spirituality and emotional connection. So that's kind of like what you're left with. And sort of what you follow, you're introduced into the piece by 4 sort of chorus members that are defined as the void. And they're sort of setting this stage that they are about to set a stage kind of between 2 individuals who you find out, again, this is all through movement, are intertwined with each other in an intimate way. And they showcase that. And there's a beautiful duet piece that they do. And I just watching 2 bodies sort of intertwine with each other and tell an entire relationship story just by moving and breathing with each other was like astonishing. And then each individual from this relationship has their own solo piece too. And you see them sort of break down and build themselves back up. And a couple things that floated in my mind throughout the piece were like, what does it mean when the one you love is torn away from you? Or what does it mean? Like, if you can't be there for the person that you love, what do you have to do to change yourself? And then interspersed between our 2 sort of protagonists, you had the void, the 4 chorus members rather, sometimes literally placing themselves in between these 2 individuals. So kind of like creating obstacles. But also I had the experience of doing a Q&A at the end with Bree Clark and Tavia and some of the dancers. And the void also was a mechanism to kind of bridge the piece and the audience. So sort of like allowing the audience to partake, but also like, be that outside eye in a relationship, right? Like, so you really saw the 4 chorus members tugging and pulling between these 2 people, and like every single joint and muscle was like perfection. Yeah, it was just like it was the last show I saw too. So it was a beautiful breath to sort of cap the Fringe off. I was only able to see Fringe for 2 days. Unfortunately, my Fringe experience ended on the 7th, but I was very glad and grateful that it ended on that piece. So cheers to the whole cast and crew of Phantasmagoria. Yeah, you made my night that night. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Ryan and Jill, you both saw this next piece, which is Too Much Information Improvised. So TMII. And this was done by Dog Martin. So feel free to jump on in, the both of you, and give your thoughts on this improv piece, something totally new.
Yeah, do you want to first say your experience with it?
Yeah, so great friend of mine, past stage manager of mine, they're the ones that sort of put on this piece. I've actually had the opportunity, I didn't get a chance to see it during Toronto Fringe. I had a chance to see it at SoCap a couple months ago. And I also wonderfully got a chance to see them in rehearsal. And so pick their brains from that side of the table too. So I'm excited to hear Ryan's Toronto Fringe experience of TMII, because I know Steph and Patty have been working and ironing out and trying new things with the show. So Ryan, I think I'll let you start, and then I'll add my thoughts at the end, or interspersed.
I will also say, in the spirit of full disclosure, I've known Steph also for a little while, and I was actually her assistant stage manager for the Rapunzel production, in which she was the stage manager and Jill played Rapunzel. So yeah, clearly we're all family here. But yeah, TMII, I thought this was really fun. So it's, as the name suggests, an improv show. And it's specifically, at least this is kind of like the main sort of structural element, and it was in all the marketing, is that it is two exes who now have since broken up, but do an improv show together. And that's fun. So it indicates that, okay, they had a relationship. It was bad. It wasn't good for either of them. They did the smart thing by ending it, but they clearly ended it amicably, as evidenced by the fact that they're still friends and they do a comedy show together all about that time in their life. So yeah, I will say it was really fun. It was a great sketch comedy piece by two infectiously funny people. I kind of think what's interesting, and Jill, we can kind of talk about if this was different from your experience, because I feel like that little description that I gave of it, which is how it has been sold, is kind of only half of the story, because it's been very much selling it on the grounds of this is them doing comedy about their failed relationship. When, at least in the version I saw, and I understand that it is improv, so it is possibly different every night and has been different as it has developed over the times, like in the rehearsal and the other previous version that you got to see, Jill. But to me, I felt like they were, first of all, it was very much, okay, we talk a bit about this relationship and then we cut to unrelated sketch comedy, which was kind of like very funny and all really well done, but I didn't really feel like there was a clear connective through line between those two halves. All very entertaining, but it was like half of the show was about this failed relationship and the other half was, hey, let's just do a funny scene that is maybe vaguely on romantic comedy themes. Often, maybe not even always, but that's kind of the fun of improv. But the other reason why I say it maybe kind of also doesn't feel like what was being sold is because, at least the night I saw, maybe this is also part of the improvisation changing the shape every night, is that they weren't even really talking much about the relationship that they, Steph and Patty, had together. Almost all of the parts where they cut to monologues talking about this relationship was less about their experience dating each other and more about their relationship to the mutual friend who had introduced them and who was specifically Steph's partner before she left him and started dating Patty before they also didn't work out. And yeah, so I kind of felt like, there was still a lot of like great stuff in there, but it kind of felt like they were talking more about the inception of their failed relationship and the actual relationship that they had with each other. Which, again, nothing wrong with that, but I don't know, I feel like there was a bit of a dissonance between the marketing and the actual show, again, that I saw, knowing that it could be different every night, and maybe other nights really did lean more into the kind of stuff that corroborates what the marketing is selling. If I have to give one light critique, because that's none of that I've said so far as a critique, is, to me, I genuinely believe that what I saw was improv, but I also felt like it might have been a little too polished, which doesn't sound like a critique, but a little too polished to feel like it has the aesthetics of improv, if that makes sense. And because they very much just kind of jump from scene to monologue, and it was almost like too solid, too funny, didn't have that rough around the edges feel of the actual mechanics of thinking of it on the spot. And I think part of why I'm feeling this way about it is because I feel like there wasn't very much call and response from the audience in which they requested suggestions that then established the scenes that they did thereafter. In my recollection, it's been a little while since I saw it now, but I believe there were only 3 moments in which they specifically sought suggestions from the audience. The first one was at the very beginning when they basically just said, like, everybody shout out a rom-com, everybody shout out a ballad, and they kind of then didn't do anything with that suggestion. It was kind of just like a fun, oh yes, people name funny things. And then the second instance where they requested an audience suggestion was when they were talking about this mutual friend who had introduced them. They said, we're not going to use his real name, so somebody shout out a monosyllabic male name, and then somebody yelled Joe, and for the rest of the performance, that guy's name was Joe, regardless of what his name was in real life, that they would have just always refer to him as Joe. And then the third, which was fairly near the end, time that they called for audience suggestions, was very close to the end, and was during one of the monologue segments where Patty basically said, who has a question for us? Any questions for us? And one person at the very back of the audience shouted, what happened to Joe? And then he started telling a monologue about what happened to Joe after the last time we checked in with him in the story. And to me, while I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt that that wasn't an audience plant, it felt too convenient for the narrative trajectory of where the story was going that I had a hard time believing that it's not an audience plant, even though I will give it the benefit of the doubt. And that's, I think, where I'm coming from. As entertaining and funny as the show was, it truly was a knee-slapping good time. I didn't really feel like there was enough playing with the audience suggestions or even being open to audience suggestions that, as far as I was concerned, what I could have been watching might have been completely pre-scripted, pre-rehearsed, and still thoroughly entertaining. So, yeah, it's a very light critique there. I don't think any of this is a problem, but that was kind of how I felt about it. But of course, it was still really great. There was one moment, if I can shout out just one moment, when they were telling the story about their relationship, and it was like the night that they kind of first sort of got together, and Patty was doing the monologue, and he's like, just to be clear, she came back to my place, but nothing happened. And then Steph, who was standing off on the side, said, basically, or almost, I don't remember the exact word, that she did like this little like dancey twirl that was like, I don't recall there actually being a hair flip in this gesture, but it was the pure essence of a hair flip happening on the periphery of the stage. And I just lost it. I laughed so hard during that. So yeah, I don't think that this kind of light critique that I made a moment ago of the aesthetics of improv and whether or not it was thoroughly integrated into the performance is anything against it. If they do tour this, as they have been touring at other Fringe festivals, I highly do encourage people to see it because it was hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of tag on to that, like I said, I had 2 different instances of seeing this show. I didn't get to see it at Fringe, but I saw it at SoCap and in the rehearsal process. And what you're explaining, Ryan, like I do remember Patty and Steph sort of like guideposting themselves with those things, but I think it also depends on like the questions that are asked. To be honest, I'm going to go up to bat for them. I don't think that was a plant. I know Patty and Steph, like through their process, there's like different guideposts or whatever that they're ready for. But one of the awesome things that both iterations I saw at the show is literally they're thrown a random ass question and they just have to roll with it. So I guess I would
have liked that question to be more random, which to me it didn't
Sure.
feel random, but that was just the night I saw somebody asked a very pointed, specific question that did fit within the narrative they were telling.
Yeah. And one of the iterations I saw them become like mice on a cheese heist. So like, you're very right. And it could be the performance just kind of drives whatever the vibe is in the room. But like literally Patty and Steph, I would see the show over and over and over again. It is
so would I.
a knee slapping good time.
And seeing it over and over again would prove my suspicions wrong, which is what I like about it.
But let's pivot, Mac. Where are we taking to next?
Well, we're going back to Ryan again for 6 chick flicks, or a legally blonde pretty woman dirty danced on the beaches while writing a notebook on the Titanic. Presented by Kiri
Ipema, correct me in the comments if that's not correct. Yeah, so this was, I kind of follow this on the coattails of TMII because it's another 2-hander sketch type comedy show that I thought was really entertaining. Again, this was another highlight. I front loaded all the highlights. Can you blame me? I have a poster here for it.
It's a great poster.
So this is exactly what the title suggests. It is a 2-hander. It was performed by Carrie Empa and KK Apple, and it was co-created by Carrie Ipema I again hope I'm pronouncing this right. Probably not. I've said it different every time. And TJ Daw, who, for those familiar with TJ Daw's work, he is basically Fringe Festival royalty, at least on this side of the Canadian border. So, and he does very much specialize in these types of pop culture mashup parody type pieces. So when I saw his name attached to it, I knew, okay, I'm in for something good here. So yeah, 6 chick flicks. It is, just from beginning to end, they did these micro versions of full chick flicks with just the 2 performers who were both hilarious and incredibly talented. And yeah, it was very intelligently structured, the way that, because not all of these movies are as well known or as beloved as others, or maybe haven't had the same staying power as they did in their own time. So they were very smart to start with Titanic, because they draw everyone in with one that everybody knows and everybody has watched many times, probably on TBS. And I think, so they started with Titanic, and it was a very funny, well done scene. They made a lot of jokes at the expense of that door not having enough room for 2 people, which
for God's sake, Jack was supposed to die. The door wasn't supposed to work.
So let's stay on track, Mac.
But here's the thing. Whereas I feel like a lot of people make jokes about the door thinking that they're the most clever person for coming up with that for the first time. These 2 did it in a different way, because it was very clearly a meta joke about how everybody comments about the door. It wasn't them being like, hey, Jack should have lived because of the door. It's you're thinking about the door, we're thinking about the door, let's make jokes about the door because it's fun and we all came here for exactly this. So I highly respect it, even though it was never about size, it was always about buoyancy. We know this, it doesn't really matter.
Well said, that's exactly it.
Okay, and this is a running theme throughout the performance, that they break up their reenactments of the pieces to comment on why all of these chick flicks, which are all written by male screenwriters, completely don't understand certain things about women. So there was this kind of freeze frame meta commentary there that was constantly intercut in the pieces. And there were very clearly last minute edits that were made to the script in response to the recent Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade, because that was very much this, angry undercurrent that was fueling a lot of this comedy, which I think was very well done and, definitely found its moment here in how to, deconstruct these pieces in a healthy and cathartic way amidst all of this literal tyranny on the south of the border, which I believe is where these performers come from. So they went on through Titanic. Next, they did Pretty Woman, which was also very funny. Then they did Beaches, which is, I'm not going to lie, I've never seen Beaches. That's like
You've never seen The Wind Beneath My Wings, Ryan?
I know the song. I've never seen the movie, so that one was a little lost on me, but it was still very funny. And that one was actually the shortest. I think they realized that's not a movie most people have rewatched since the 90s. So I think they were smart to keep that one a little on the shorter end. It was still very funny, even having not seen it and not getting the references. I still thought it was very entertaining. But yeah, I think they knew their audience, that they really wanted to do Beaches, but knew that they had to keep it short. Then they did Notebook, then Legally Blonde, and then they ended with Dirty Dancing, which was such a showstopper. They did the full dance at the end, and it was incredible.
Did they do the lift?
They did the lift. They made a joke earlier in the Dirty Dancing sequence that they weren't able to or couldn't do the lift, and then they did it at the end, and it was mind-boggling. I absolutely loved it. So this was just, again, smart commentary packaged in a truly side-splitting show. Well done to them.
Woohoo!
Love it. Okay, back to me with my next show, which is Buckets Full of Blood, Fairy Tale Not for Kids, presented by Story Alive, and it featured the creator, writer, director of the piece, Eden Ballantyne, and he is basically a man from Britain who goes to all these different fringe festivals, does both adult and children's shows based on the Grimm fairy tales. So when I was looking for a piece to do, and I saw, Grimm fairy tales, this is right up Mac's alley. I mean, if I could turn around right now, I'd show you my full-on beautiful art version of the Grimm fairy tale book, because yes, they're some of my favorite things. So the concept was simple yet so enjoyable, because there are many people in the audience who were not like me, who were the smart aleck who knew all the twists and turns of all these fairy tales. Like his whole thing, his first question was, what was Cinderella's slipper made out of? And in Grimm fairy tales. Now everybody says glass, but he goes, no, it's gold, right? So Mac, being the smart aleck in the back of the theater, is kind of saying under his breath gold, and everybody else is saying glass. So there's a bit of like, if you didn't know all the intertwists of a Grimm's fairy tales, like the stepsisters cut off their toe, cut off their heel, get their eyes pecked out, that type of thing, you'd be a little more shocked by it. So I wasn't as shocked, but he was such a good storyteller and such a great energy on stage that you just couldn't help but be drawn in to the piece. And I mean, the fact that he had no props, he really had a black box on the stage that he used sometimes to either sit on or march over if he was trying to show movement or time passing. Like the fact he was still able to give such an animated performance to these stories was really fantastic. Really well done. I mean, my only thing is that I wish we got a little more time with him doing these stories, because he covered, what did he cover? He covered Cinderella. He talked about Little Red Riding Hood. He talked about the Juniper Tree. He talked about the Robber Bridegroom, kind of the 4 big main ones he did. And so that was a lot of fun, but I'm like, there's so much more. Like, I almost would have loved to have seen him just open the book randomly and just choose random ones to talk about. Now, so obviously there's some you don't want to talk about, like the Jew and the Thorns. That one definitely can go the way of the dodo. But overall, I mean, it was a fantastic piece. And I mean, the fact that some of the audience really didn't know some of these darker fairy tale aspects was really great to see their reaction to things like in the Juniper Tree, where the stepmother decapitates her stepson by dropping a trunk lid on him and then cooks him into a stew for the father to eat. And the father literally sucks the marrow out of the bones without even knowing that it's his son. And then the son is reincarnated as a bird that then drops a millstone on the stepmother's head and kills her. Right?
As you do.
Oh,
As you
Hannah.
do. As you do. And I mean, he also got in some great commentary on just like the fact that women are not well portrayed in these stories. Like the fact that like there are a lot of women who just don't have names, that are just the girl, or like the woman in like
The wife
Bridegroom.
of so-and-so.
Exactly. Like the fact that Robert Bridegroom is all about this heroine who is, first of all, sold off into marriage by her father, who then ventures into the forest, goes into a dark house, finds out that there are a whole bunch of cannibals in there, and yet she never is given a name. She's just called the Bride. It's like Grimm fairy tales. Maybe we could have done a bit better on that. But no, like it's really great. There's some stuff I didn't even know. Like in Little Riding Hood, there's a version of it where Little Red Riding Hood, in order to save herself, does a striptease for the wolf and still ends up getting eaten. So there's a lot there with that one. So anyway, but he did such a great job animating these stories. And he did a little bit of audience participation, like he had us sing the bird song from the Juniper Tree. But I would have loved to go even further with it, like bring us up on stage and say like, hey, you are going to be playing the Robber Bridegroom. And every time I say I go to you, you do this motion, this type of thing, like a chopping motion to show you're chopping up a body. I don't know. Like, I think you could have gone even further with their participation, because the audience was so enraptured in his performance and was so engaged with him, and he so much invited audience interaction, that I think you could have gone even further with it to heighten it even more. But I would say it's still such a fun show. Like, for one guy just to get up there for an hour and to hold your attention as he's telling these gruesome fairy tale stories was so well done. It was such an honest shock of, I didn't know what to fully expect going in, but it was just a very well done piece. So bravo, buckets full of blood. Fairy tale not for kids. Disney, you should look into the Robert Bridegroom. I think that's your next like animated classic right there.
But now should we pivot to Kids Fest?
Yes, Jill.
Yeah,
this
start
is
with
all
not for
you
kids, and now let's go to kids.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is all you and Ryan did a whole bunch of kids stuff. So
Exactly,
starting off,
yeah.
you have Jay and Shilo, Nightmare Neighbors by Goldenberg Productions. So Jill, give us the rundown. What was this piece?
Yeah, so this is the first piece I saw on Fringe, and I loved it. I thought, so here's a thing that I wasn't aware of. Supposedly Jay and Shilo, they're returning to the Fringe. So that makes a whole hoop of sense, because the show that I saw was kind of like a snapshot of almost like an episode of like a kids TV program. Okay. Yeah. So I would imagine, so again, I live underneath the Kids Fest rock, clearly, because I would imagine Jay and Shilo have been to Kids Fest several years. So this one, so they had Nightmare Neighbors and they also had Prop Catastrophe. So those are the two Jay and Shilo productions that were in the 2022 Fringe. I had the opportunity of seeing Nightmare Neighbors. And again, I loved it. I thought it was such a perfect piece for the Fringe. Like it had a very awesome trajectory, beginning, middle, end. So basically, Jay and Shilo are two siblings. I believe they're siblings. They might have been friends. Anyways, they're in a theater space. So it's very meta in that sense. And something happens in their theater space and they have to work through a problem or help other characters that are in the theater with them work through a problem. So it's very kind of like Sesame Street-esque. And Jada Rifkin, who I have seen in multiple productions, she is hilarious. I've been in auditions with her too. Shout out to Jada. She played the mermaid along with the narrator. She kind of was guiding Jay and Shilo and other characters around. I just want to shout out Jada, but the whole cast was awesome. So it was Jay and Shilo, and then there was a phantom character, and then Jada, who played the mermaid and the narrator. And basically, Jay and Shilo start us off. There's a little musical interlude, and all of a sudden, this sort of ruckus happens underneath the stage, and it's the theater's phantom playing pranks on the mermaid lagoon that's like underneath it, like in the basement of the theater. And sort of Jay and Shilo bring the phantom through, like, you have to move, you can't play pranks anymore, so we're going to move you outside of the theater. He comes in contact with like a fairy who's even more bombastic than he is, and like turns his cape into glitter, and he's like, well, I don't like this. And they're like, whoa, how does it feel? You're getting a taste of your own medicine. And there's the whole sort of like thesis of this little parable-esque piece is like, there was a through line of consent of like, just because you think things are funny or because, you want to play pranks doesn't mean other people will appreciate them or want them back. And there was the whole sort of like learning lesson for the phantom and how he had to genuinely apologize to the mermaid. And there was a whole song, which I loved, that was unpacking how he thought he was just telling a joke. But there's the through line of like, well, sometimes jokes aren't funny. And if jokes aren't funny, then you shouldn't say them. And I was like, well, this is a wonderful, like, child-packed message that adults nowadays should listen to. But it was just jam-packed.
Cough, cough.
Yeah, it was jam-packed with, the color was astonishing on stage, like sets to costumes. It was like a rainbow event. The physicality was perfect. The actor who played the Phantom, his name is escaping my mind, lovely human. I met him at Almond Butterfly afterwards, but he was hilarious. And it was just like a perfect slice of a show, captivating kids and adults. Yeah. And there wasn't like, sometimes with Fringe, and rightfully so, like some folks are workshopping pieces for Fringe, right? So it's kind of, you go into every Fringe show thinking this may not be a fully ironed out piece, and that's okay. It's sometimes the first time that a piece is up on its feet. But I have to say, with Jay and Shilo Nightmare Neighbors, this was like a perfect nugget of show. Like it was ready. And so my only critique is some of the songs that bookend the piece were almost like too big for the stage that it was on. So I'd be interested to see if Jay and Shilo get more of a life and almost maybe like a concert series in like a bigger venue. I feel like that would be super captivating and sort of round out the piece itself. Yeah.
Love it.
So that's Jay and Shilo.
Next,
Nightmare Neighbors
is The Questing Beast by
Yes.
Dreamerz Puppetry and Film, which we see there. I'm ahead.
There it is. Yeah. So Questing Beast. So again, I want to shout out Christoph Ibrahim. You've seen him on our musical theater round table of the Cup. He played one of our characters in this piece and was hilarious and like such a grounding force. So kudos to you, Christoph. So the Questing Beast, let's kind of just like bring in an intro of what it's about. King Pellinor basically has been spending his whole life searching for this like questing beast, which we see it is a giraffe, but it's kind of like this myth. It's said to be a mythical creature. And so he's sort of on this search for the questing beast. It's been something in his family tree since the dawn of time. And you see he sort of like comes across some kinsmen and they help him find the beast as well. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to sort of break down this piece. I thought The acting, the usage of puppetry was awesome. Like our mythical creature of the giraffe was like a giant, like brilliant physicality used with that puppet. And some of the conversations between the prince or the late, our now king and the late king were done in puppets as well. And I found those scenes super, super captivating. I will say the transitions for me in this piece were a bit truncated or clunky. Again, I'm pretty sure it was the performance after they did tech. So again, kudos. The first performance you do without text, like that's a whole nother ball game. But I would have wanted a bit of more adhesion between like the usage of puppetry and then the usage of actors. So again, the scenes were hilarious, but again, like some cohesion of where is this taking the plot and why is this taking the plot? The actors were phenomenal though, and so hilarious. I think there was just a disconnect between the usage of puppetry, the usage of in real life actors, and then going from scene to scene and sort of why we're going from scene to scene. And again, I think Ryan had mentioned this, I think with TMII and the marketing, I think the marketing of the Questing Beast and what I saw wasn't as parallel as I thought it was going to be, which again is not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, I had an awesome time. I thought it was hilarious. The kids were enjoying it. I think with this piece, I'd love to see it sort of, have an existent life and just see where it goes from Fringe.
Love it.
Yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
All right, Jill and Ryan, this one is for you both, which is The Prince's Big Adventurer, which is Three Little Bear Productions. Such a cute name. Mm-hmm. Ryan, you want to start this one?
Sure, Jill, you've been talking for a while. We'll give your voice a rest. Yeah, they didn't have a print program. They had a QR code program, so I have that here on my phone. Cute. Yeah, The Prince's Big Adventurer. Yeah, it's right behind Mac there for those watching on YouTube. Yeah, this was delightful. It's the only Kids Fest show that I saw this year. But of all the ones to see, I the other ones Jill described sounded really good too. But I was really glad I saw this one because I just thought it was so sweet and charming. So it was written and directed by Stephen Elliott Jackson. It was a musical and has music by Tyler Check. And it is performed by a 5-hand cast, including Nick Seraph as our protagonist, Prince Seamus, Brandon Knox as the adventurer Brody, Olivia John, who shout out to Jill and I, we just did Rapunzel with her. She played Gothel in that as Princess Henrietta.
Wow.
And speaking of Rapunzel crew, Astrid Atherley is in this, although the day that we went to see it, she was being covered by a swing, whose name I did not catch and is not credited in the program. I don't know if you caught her name.
Her first name is Nicola, I believe, but I didn't catch her last name.
Yes, well, okay. First off, shout out to this amazing swing. If we didn't know you were a swing, we would have had no idea. You really, we would have loved to see Astrid, who, but you did a great job in her absence, and Jim Armstrong as King Wilbur. So,
King Wilbur.
So this is a kids show, but I've tried to think of the best way to describe it. I would say that it is a fairy tale about fairy tales, kind of in the mold of something like Shrek. But it is very much about, or Into the Woods. But I think the way I want to describe it is it's about the princess industrial complex, i.e. that we have a young prince, Prince Seamus, played by Nick Seraph, and he is coming of age, and his father, King Wilbur, wants him to rescue a princess and get married so that he can take over the kingdom one day. But he's a young, sensitive boy who just wants to, do other pursuits. He's not really interested in fighting the gigantic spider and slaying the dragon, as these types of quests typically entail. So his father, in order to kind of force him out of the nest, has hired and or arranged for a princess to be rescued. And the princess played by Olivia, and the Princess Henrietta, who's a lot of funny jokes that her father is the notorious Henry VIII, so there's a lot of decapitation humor in there. Quite dark, actually, but still really funny and well done. And because Prince Seamus is too sensitive to fight the spider and dragon himself, his father has hired an adventurer to accompany him, named Brody, played by Brandon Knox. And, I do hope this one has a bit of an afterlife too, but I will spoil the main thrust here. This is a queer romance story between Prince Seamus and Brody, that over the course of this adventure, We find out perhaps why Seamus is less interested in rescuing the princess, and it is because he's gay, and that's perfectly fine, and we should be exposing kids to that at a very young age. So over the course of going on this adventure with his mercenary adventurer Brody, the two of them slowly fall in love. And I think what I think is sort of the master stroke of this script is that, obviously we get our happy ending at the end. This is a kids show. It's not going to end with, you can't be gay, marry the princess and be sad. Like, our happy couple gets to be happy at the end. But the real masterstroke here is that the plot mechanics that allow this to unfold is really based on the fact not that the parents have any resistance to their son marrying a man. They have resistance to him not marrying a princess, because that's what princes are supposed to do. And the plot hinges on the fact that the king and queen have also partaken in this unconventional relationship that they tried to have covered up, that the queen herself was not actually a princess prior to being married. So it is the revelation that these rules have been broken once before and have never really been as rigid as we've always tried to enforce them to be, that allows this happy ending of, fine, you can marry the man you love. So I talked about this fairly recently on our Brokeback Mountain, the opera review, is that I love that we have so much post-closet children's entertainment right now. Because, so many children, I think for so long, especially if you're growing up somewhere on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, really not knowing what your place is, seeing a lot of stories that represent, your love is okay, but you will have struggles and people won't understand and you have to come out and make a big thing about it. I am loving that we have so much children-oriented entertainment now that is treating queerness as a non-issue. And they still encounter obstacles and there will be problems that they face along the way, but it's never because you're gay and society won't accept you for it. So I think that's delightful, and I really do feel like that's a super positive message that I love that children's entertainment is trending in this direction, and I just want to see more of it. So this was a really excellent piece for that. Jill, you saw it too. Thoughts?
Yes, I can completely concur with all that you said, Ryan. It was such a breath of fresh air watching this piece unfold. And I just want to also shout out the songs were phenomenal and groovy. Like Olivia's song as Princess Henrietta was like so groovy. And I just would love to see this piece have more life. And I think it should. And it was lovely being in the audience and seeing parents and kids like bop along and have a fabulous time. And that, this content is becoming more and more normalized in our society for kids, because as it should be. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say on that.
Love it. All right, Ryan, over to you with Garden of Alla.
Yeah, Alla.
Perfect. By Mar Gaslight Productions.
Okay, so this is an appropriate one to follow up The Prince's Big Adventurer with, because it's by the same playwright, Stephen Elliott Jackson.
It's almost like you planned it that way, Ryan.
I almost did. No, I definitely did. Yeah, so it's another... Clearly, there's a cohesive body of work going on with this particular artist, not because this is a kids' show, but because it also contains queer themes. So this is set in the golden age of Hollywood, and it is a 3. I believe, I could be wrong, that this is based on a true story. I meant to look it up after and totally forgot to do that before we recorded this to find out more about the historicity of what was going on here. But the short version is that we have our main character is a big star of the golden age of Hollywood. Her name is Alla Nazimova, and she is married, and it is revealed, in case anyone was unclear from the way they behave with each other, but is revealed to be a lavender marriage with her director friend, Charles Bryant, played by Sean Lall. Also, Alla is played by Rebecca Perry. And she's also has a relationship on the side with a costume designer named Natasha Rambova, played by Netta J. Rose. And so it is the 3 of these characters who kind of have this interesting sort of thruple, polycule kind of dynamic with each other, although there doesn't seem to be anything romantic going on between Charles and Natasha, but Alla is living between both of them. And it's basically about being a queer artist in this particular moment in Hollywood history, right before the Hays Code went into effect, and how that changed queer artists' lives forever, because, even if the content they were putting out specifically wasn't queer-oriented, it didn't really matter what you were producing, it was about who you were. But in the case of Alla Nazimova in particular, she is producing very subversive content that the Hays Code did not approve of. And the plot of this piece hinges on the fact that she self-produced a feature film production of Oscar Wilde's Salome, which, for those who are familiar with it, it is based on the biblical story of Salome, and with all of the incest and decapitation and exotic dancing that goes with it. So it's about her putting on this piece as a passion project, her tasking her husband Charles to direct it, and Natasha to create costumes for it. But then after the film is made, right as the tensions are coming to a boil, struggling to find a distributor for it, and ultimately having the project completely buried. And I liked this piece a lot. I thought it was very strong, well written. The dialogue was super sharp. We have, these fun, sassy gay characters just bouncing off each other in very dynamic ways, which I thought was very interesting. But then it did, much like other more comedic, dramatic hybrid pieces we've discussed already, it does hit hard when it needs to. I thought I was expecting there to be more, perhaps, engagement with what does it mean to adapt Salome to film, whereas that was kind of, to me, felt very incidental. It could have been any film that the Hays Code would have disapproved of, but at the end of the day, it was more just about the character dynamics between these three people and the socio-political conflicts that they face with the larger Hollywood structures that were bearing down on them, and this rising tide of conservative ideology that was going to have very drastic effects on the film industry. And I think that's a perfectly fine, serviceable story. I just felt like it maybe could have gone in other interesting directions that it didn't. And ultimately, I found maybe the climax was just a little underwhelming, and it was at once both predictable, but also that's it. And I would have liked to maybe see more, but if this is indeed based on true figures from history, I can respect not overemphasizing their struggles. Clearly, they went through enough in life. So yeah, the performers were all very strong. It was a very sharply made piece. The production design of this was very well done. I did not write down the name. Actually, I might have it on my phone, but we're probably running low on time. But yeah, shout out to the production design. It was very glitzy, and it very much created this very lavish house of these performers that I thought, truly was the garden of the title, which I thought was very well realized. So hats off to you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, along with the Hollywood track, we have the next piece, which was what I saw, which was the Joan and Olivia, A Hollywood Ghost Story by Ebb and Flow Theatre. It was written by Georgia Finley and directed by Matt Egger. And it starred Georgia Finley, Nicole Mahler, Mackenzie Kelly, who Jill and I have both worked with in Oh What a Lovely War at Hart House Theatre, and Crystal Caesar. And this piece was fantastic. It was the close second to my favorite piece, which is coming up. But it was so well done. And so a little bit of backstory. If you don't know your old Hollywood history, Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland were sisters of the golden age of Hollywood. They often competed for roles, awards, men, the whole nine yards. Joan was married 4 times. Olivia, I think, only married once. Joan beat Olivia to the Oscar, and she was the baby sister to Olivia, who was the older sister. Joan just died only a few years ago at age 104. So basically the whole premise is when Olivia dies, instead of her spirit going up to heaven or the afterlife, her spirit is transported and put back into their childhood home, where the spirit of Joan has been already residing. Basically, she finds out that for all of eternity, she's now stuck as a spirit in their childhood home together. Mm-hmm. And they bicker for a bit. It's great. And then tenants move into the house, and there are 2 sisters who move in, played by Mackenzie Kelly and Crystal Caesar. And basically, the 2 spirits decide to have a competition to see who could influence their protege more in life. And ultimately,
that's funny.
It starts out funny, but then it gets tragic in the sense of the relationship dynamics that were present in their personal life, which, if you don't know your Hollywood history, is after 5 decades of knowing each other, they stopped speaking to each other. They full on just excommunicated each other, hated each other. So the fact that does bleed over into their proteges and their relationship is really kind of displaying the cyclical cycle of interrelational, generational trauma and how that kind of gets passed down the line. And so it was so well done. And I mean, just the way Finley was able to capture Olivia and Joan's old Hollywood style dialect and language, which is very different than modern language. Like the fact they speak in that mid-Atlantic, quasi-British, Katharine Hepburn type voice, like the fact they were able to speak like that, and then also just their choice of words, which is very old Hollywood. And I mean, just the alluring way they influenced these two other characters was so great that you kind of get drawn into this kind of bitchy cat fight story that by the end you go, oh crap, I got drawn in by something I shouldn't have. The poisonous part of the relationship really does seep into the story, and it's really good. And I was so sad when it ended because I'm like, I want an act 2. I want more resolution to this story, that it wraps up so fast. It's like, oh wait, is there more? Like, and I even asked Mackenzie after the show, because I met up with her and I said, was there a more resolved version of this piece, or was it always meant to be more ambiguous with how it ends? And she said the writer always intended to be more ambiguous. So for me, I go, I love that because it works right for the 60-minute Fringe time. But if you were to extend it into a 2-act broader story and kind of extend some moments out more, because you're jumping through time, because you see the girls grow up as the influence of these Hollywood starlets continues. So you could probably extend the story out and make it into a 2-act bigger story, and it would be just as good. So, I mean, for me, I thoroughly enjoyed this piece. And just as a fan of old Hollywood, this was right up my alley. I mean, I actually went back and rewatched some of the old Joan Fontaine, Olivia de Havilland films to kind of get myself in their mindset of what they did. Then also I rewatched Feud with Betty and Joan, which was all about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, and Olivia de Havilland is featured in it. She notably sued Ryan Murphy for defamation for her portrayal in the show. So lots of Hollywood drama there. But no, it just totally captured that era of time, that classic old Hollywood style. It was really well done. And just the subtle ways they showed, like the phantom time versus the modern day time, was really well done. So I thoroughly enjoyed the piece. So bravo. I would happily recommend it because I know it's going to some other fringes. So definitely recommend getting your chance to see it. So well done. All right, Ryan, back to you with Gay for Pay with Blake and Clay at Action Production.
Yeah. Okay, so this is completing the trilogy of things about Hollywood that start funny and turn out to be tragic. So much like Garden of Alla, it's very much about queerness and its relationship to the film industry. So this is a piece, it was co-written by Curtis DeBrink and Daniel Krolik. And Curtis also directed it, and Daniel was one of the two performers. I believe he played Blake, and Clay is played by Jonathan Wilson. So right off the bat, I'll say that I've known Curtis since our days at York in theater school. He's a very talented writer and director. I've championed his work pretty much since the very beginning. In fact, I wrote an essay in one of our second year classes about a piece that he performed in our school. So clearly I may be going into this one a little biased, but it's also been a number of years since I've seen anything by him. We've kind of lost touch, and I didn't know what kind of work he was doing these days. So then I was very happy to see that he had a Fringe show, and hey, who did I run into at the performance? Why, it's Curtis himself. And I got to sit in the audience with him, and I got to see this piece that, I kid you not, I think was, again, one of my real highlights for this festival. It was very strong. And so to kind of just, sorry, I've gone on that little tangent there, but to say what it's about, we, the audience, are attending an acting seminar by our titular characters, Blake and Clay, who teach straight actors how to play gay on film. Because the kind of big meta point being made here is that straight actors are stealing all of the roles from the gays, and not only stealing them, but winning prestigious awards for them. And they go through this entire list at the beginning in case you need the proof that this is actually an endemic problem. And they kind of are seeing like, okay, well, because we can no longer get roles, we will be teaching you how to play and properly represent members of the queer community on film. And it was so funny, like throughout the entire piece. They're just, these two performers, and like the really razor sharp writing here was so good. And it was a laugh a minute. And then at the end, I won't say it necessarily gets dark, but it kind of puts a very clear point on what is this piece really about and what is the problem. This is another one that I maybe don't want to spoil too much, although I've kind of spoiled the tone here, because I do really hope this one gets produced elsewhere. Although, unlike a lot of the other ones that I've said that about before, this one very much feels like a Fringe production through and through. It just kind of has that simple two-handerness, and it doesn't have like the kind of standard 3-act structure of like a very type of mimetic play. This is very much, a seminar type performance that is very clearly about something very specific that it wants you to leave going, I don't know if I should have been laughing as much as I was throughout all of that. And I don't know how much more to say about it. The two performers were excellent. The writing was really good. If this does get produced anywhere else, I highly encourage everyone to go see it, because this was definitely one of my big standouts.
Okay.
Hey.
Awesome. All right. Well, taking a total left turn into something completely different, we have a musical.
Hey.
Ooh, yes. The Crack of Doom, or How I Learned to Love the Meteor, by Brian and Bernard. And so this piece was written by Matt Bernard and composed by Susie Wild, and was directed by Matt Bernard, and had a big cast to it, as you can imagine with a musical. And the premise of the piece is that on a Thanksgiving weekend at a university campus, some students are left behind and not going home for the holiday. So they decide to have what they're told is a mixer, but what the host meant was a potluck. So nobody brings food except for one person who brings a vegan black bean dip. So that right there, not a great situation.
Delicious. Are you kidding me?
That sounds tasty. What are you talking about? Anyway,
continue.
On.
Yes. So continuing. So
I hear there's a meteor.
Yes, there's a meteor. So at the party, the news comes out that a meteor is heading toward Earth, and that all actions to divert the meteor have failed. We now have an hour left before the meteor arrives. So then it's all about the fallout from this situation. And I won't spoil how it ends, because does the meteor hit? Does it not? Who knows? This piece...
Does the black bean vegan dip taste delicious? Of course. That's right. Keep going.
Actually, that I can't answer. Everybody agrees it doesn't. That's hence why they order a pizza with cheese. So yes, all right. So with the piece, it is, as I was saying, it was like, this was my favorite show that I saw, and I actually almost didn't see it because I went to go see another musical that got sold out, which was Whose Bag Is It Anyway? So hopefully they had a good run. Didn't get a chance to see because their whole run was sold out. But this show was the audience pick for their venue. It was superb. Like, the music was so well done. Every song felt organically fit, like the moment, because as we all know in musicals, when you can no longer speak, you sing. And every moment that there was a song, it felt like, okay, yeah, you should definitely put a song here. It definitely was a kind of a Mel Brooksian style comedy where it's dark, but also funny. Like, there are moments where it's like the fact that the two characters who have kind of had this sexual tension leading up to this party decide to get together, and then they go through the entire journey of a relationship, including marriage, children, leaving, like empty nesting. They go through that entire journey throughout the show as they're like roaming around the residence and breaking into students' rooms. So very funny. But it's like a whole thing of, it takes a very serious topic of, what do you do in your last hour? Do you repent for your sins? Because we have one person who's very religious and has a whole fantastic gospel song that is like full on like repent your sins, and it's very funny. And then there's other people who are like, do I sleep with whoever I can? Do I take my shot? Would sleep with somebody else? It's really well done. So every bit of this piece worked, and it knew the right tone at the right moment. The only thing I will say is that I think they could have gotten rid of maybe one of the student characters. Every student had a moment to be shine and feature in the piece, but I think there was maybe one too many, and I think if you cut just one of them and kind of split that role into a few of the other characters and gave a little bit more to do to a few other people, versus it could have bolstered it a little bit more. And the ending, there's a little bit too much drama at the end, to be wrapped up so quickly. Like, I feel this could have been a 2-act musical because it was already 90 minutes. So I feel they could have gone the whole 120 and done a whole 2-hour piece. And had a really fun time.
90 minutes is the most that a piece can be. So hopefully if it does have an afterlife, that it will be developed into the breathing room that it needs.
I think it will, because it's such a well done. It's like I came out saying I can easily see this piece being done regionally across Canada. I hope that some of the cast is from the States. So I hope maybe it gets some life in the States and maybe makes it to off-Broadway. Because the venue for this piece worked really well. It was at the, what was it?
It was Robert Gill. It was the Robert Gill.
Yeah, Robert Gill.
Yeah.
Robert Gill Theatre. So it's a nice intimate space where it's just a keyboard, the resident room, and then the cast. And so it knew how to use the space well, and it felt big. It just filled the whole space. So that was really well done. And when you're doing a show that's supposed to be so, but yet also don't feel so tight, it did a really good job at that. So well done. I highly recommend going to see it.
Before we move on, I guess I just have a question for you, Mac, since you're the only one of us who saw it. I feel like, based on the premise, the obvious comparison is to the recent Oscar contender Don't Look Up, i.e. Big Meteor, We're All Gonna Die. Would you say that's a favorable or unfavorable comparison, or is it doing something very different, or is it kind of very much capitalizing on the cachet that film recently had?
I would say it's different. It's not as blatantly political as Don't Look Up was. Don't Look Up was a very blatant political message. This is more about the inner dynamics of a group of students who are all facing the end, the mortality of, you have an hour left, what do you do? It's not so much, we are bad, we did not look up and we should have, we didn't evade the asteroid when we had the chance. This is very much, you have no chance to evade the asteroid. We were never given that opportunity. We are just being told that it's coming. This is like, what do you do?
Right. So more existential than political.
Yes, way more existential. There's one song that gets a little political, but it's more still done in the guise of denial, like in the stages of realization, where it's like the one person goes, this is a hoax. Like, it's just the AV club doing a really elaborate campus prank to screw with all of us on Thanksgiving weekend. This is not real. Like, and then they go through all these different historical moments, like the Loch Ness Monster, the UFO sightings at Area 51, and I forget what the third one was that they have. But basically, it's 3 different situations that were all hoaxes that everybody believed. So that's the only time where they could have gone a little political, but they really, once again, they stuck to like the Loch Ness UFO. Not like, hey, we all didn't believe this and we all got screwed by it. We all were told Roe v. Wade was going to end. We all didn't believe it was going to happen. That type of thing, you know? So it very much was very smart and didn't politicize the piece. It very much knew this is a dramatic comedy. This is what we're meant to be doing. Like, we're not going to be banging you over the head with some politics. It's more, again, and don't get me wrong, they do get into religion and the whole concept of what happens when we all die, if we're going to die. Because only one of them is super religious. Everybody else is kind of ambiguous about what they believe. So the thing of, well, she's going to lead the whole repenting situation because she believes she's going to save everybody from damnation, from the rapture, you know? So they do get into a little bit of that, but once again, it's done all for that Mel Brooksian style comedic effect. It's not meant to be so darkly political as Don't Look Up was. So
cool.
Yeah, no, I would have bought the cast album for this. Had they been selling CDs in the lobby, I would have bought the cast album. Because there were so many songs that came out humming going, yeah, this is fun. So cool. Yeah, I highly recommend. All right. So the next one is The Walk in the Snow, the true story of Lise Meitner, which was a Meitner, which was a big word performance / gem rolls. And Ryan and Jill, you both saw this piece. So Jill, you haven't spoken in a hot minute. Well, you start this one.
Yeah. So Gem Rolls, again, I live under a fringe rock, clearly. Ryan was the one who's like, Gem Rolls is a fringe legend. And I was like, okay, I'm excited to be hit with some Gem Rolls material. And boy, oh boy, was I ever enthralled and astonished by this human. CBC describes Gem Rolls' performances, or Gem Rolls himself, as a master storyteller and spellbinding. And I will tell you, that is exactly what Jem Rolls gives on stage. So basically, in a nutshell, literally, he told us the true story of Lise Meitner. And as someone who I grew up as much with I had one foot in the arts and one foot in science. So Jill sitting in the audience watching a sort of theatricalized, gesturized, if that's a word, retelling of an infamous scientist, physicist, who is given a tiny stanza in most high school science textbooks, it devoted an entire performance to retelling her life and the impression that she made to the science community. She essentially is the one that pieced together the actual formula which gave us the nuclear bomb. And, you know, there's a lot of male scientists that are sprinkled in and around Lise Meitner's sort of discovery, but she is kind of in textbooks, like just mentioned once and then forgotten. But what Jem Rolls does is take us on her entire trajectory. And this is going to sound like it's demoralizing, and it's not, but essentially what Jem did was like highly theatricalize and betterize. I'm just making up words because I can. It's a sort of Wikipedia page of Lise Meitner's life. Again, that sounds like I'm describing what he did as low art. Absolutely freaking not. This man, and it was, again, through like gesture. So each character or human that sort of was sewn into Lise's story had like a specific gesture. I believe it was Boar had like a pipe coming out of his mouth, and Jem would always make the exact same gesture, the exact same sound. So you're listening to and he nonstop is speaking and just moving himself from pockets of the stage into spotlight, out of spotlight. So you're sitting there just listening to a story, but then there's theatrical elements that are sprinkled in on top of his storytelling, such as lighting, such as movement, such as gesture, that again, you're like, oh, wait, what does that mean? Or how do I unpack that? And then he continues telling the story and you're like, wait a second, I can't think back of why he unpacked that or did that because I also want to hear what he's saying next. And it was so like cathartic and like meditative to listen to. So I like left the theater feeling educated. I left the theater feeling empowered because not only did he tell this woman's story, but he lifted it and sort of mapped it out in a formula that arguably probably has never been told before. And yeah, I'm going on this like little tangent here, but Ryan, do you want to pick me up? Yeah, I could be talking hours and hours about the show.
Yeah, So I'll say, yeah, I was familiar with Jem Rolls as this person who basically performs these one-person shows about famous figures in science history or less famous figures in science history. But I've never actually seen one of his performances. He's been at pretty much every Fringe festival I've attended, or certainly most of them. And every time I look at that in the program, I'm like, yeah, maybe this will be the year I check that out. And just for one reason or another in my programming decisions for myself, I never wind up getting around to it. So when Jill told me that she was going to, this one sounded interesting, that it was going on her limited selections for this, I was like, okay, great, tell me how it is, because that's an artist I've been intrigued about for a while but never quite get around to seeing his work. And then Jill came home from the performance and told me that I, of all people, should see this, that you compared it to a certain thought experiment that we don't need to get into details now, but that I often invoke to describe my doctoral research to people. So she said, it's basically like that thing you're always talking about. Like, well, I guess I have to see this. This will be the year. So yeah, it was kind of remarkable. Like the way he, there's this like really like interesting storytelling rhythm. The gestures was all like a huge part of it. And yeah, completely concur with it's like he's just reading a Wikipedia page, but if he can be that dynamic while reading a Wikipedia page, I would say that's a remarkable performance. And like, I don't know, there's, more things we could say about Lise Meitner in particular. There's like her whole, she was Jewish. She's had to, escape Nazi Germany in order to make the scientific discoveries that she does. So she was already an outsider in that regard. And then a big thesis statement for the entire performance is that, she was snubbed for the Nobel Prize so many times. Maybe we shouldn't be treating these awards as seriously as we do because all of these less remarkable male scientists kept winning over her. So we probably shouldn't put as much stock in that, but here, let's pay homage to her story. Like, she never really got her actual life. And the one kind of thing that I thought was really amazing about this performance, and it comes back to the gesture. This might sound strange to describe it this way, but what I saw in this performance was literally what Antonin Artaud was always talking about. This was literally theater of cruelty. And that might sound strange because it's literally just a guy monologuing about a long dead scientist. How is that theater of cruelty? Where's the blood, the viscera, the gore? But if you actually people tend to overemphasize that element of Artaud's writing because they want to stage blood, viscera, and gore. But the main thing that Artaud was always talking about was the hieroglyphic language of bodily gesture. And that when he talks about cruelty, it's about physicality. It's about communicating with your body when words fail, and specifically abandoning words and canonicity and masterpieces in order to get back to this embodied language that he, basically cribbed from the Balinese dancers that he saw at this Parisian World's Fair. But I think it's interesting because, Jill, you said when you saw opening night of this performance that he commented that he has no formal theater training, that this is just, which is amazing, because this was the most literal interpretation of something that we all read in theater school and most people get wrong. That when he does Niels Bohr, he's creating a language of gesture that could tell the story, that if you had watched the first half of it exactly as is and then put it on mute for the second half, if you could put a live play on mute, but if he just did the gestures without saying the words, you could understand what the story was. And when each character is brought up and when certain ideas are brought up just based on the movements he does, because you recognize the patterns, and he has turned these gestures into a language. So I just thought that was kind of stunning. And for someone who, by his own admission, doesn't actually have formal theater training, this is truly magnetic performance skills that, really elevated something that could have been very boring and yet never was.
Yep. Mic drop. Thank you, Gem Rolls.
He's toured this play at other festivals that I've seen. I didn't see it then, but I've seen that he's done this play before. He does other works all similar in theme, and definitely go see this man. I regret that I haven't seen him until now.
Very good. All right, Ryan, you're up again with The Chess Player by Theater Omnibus.
Yes, another one-man show, also set amidst World War II. Fancy that ordering. So this is written, directed, and performed by Richard McElvain, and it's adapted from the novella, my German isn't great, Schachnovelle is what it's called, by Stefan Zweig, or Zweig. He's a semi-remembered Austrian author that, if you have heard of him fairly recently, it's probably because his writings were the inspiration, not source, but inspiration of the recent Wes Anderson film. Hey, another Wes Anderson reference. Recent Wes Anderson film, The Grand Budapest Hotel. And his name kind of circulated a lot in the discourse around that movie when it came out. Not because it was adapted from any particular source by Zweig, but because Zweig's essence was infused throughout the film. And I was all prepared when I saw that in the program. Oh, adapted from Stefan Zweig. I will make a point of mentioning, check that box of, you've probably heard of him because of Grand Budapest Hotel. Well, the play kind of beat me to it. Not in so many words, but they made multiple references in it to the author of this piece, Richard McElvain, being, well, you're no Wes Anderson, by the way. This dialogue isn't as great. You're no Wes Anderson, so clearly they want us to draw these connections, and they're familiar with the fact that most people today are only familiar with this author for that reason. But he was a very prominent author in his life, around the kind of pre- and post-World War II periods. And I have not read the novella that this is based on, but to kind of just briefly talk about the story, it is about a man who is arrested by the Gestapo and put in this solitary confinement chamber where he gets interrogated once a day, but otherwise he's completely alone and he slowly goes insane. But he happens to get his hands on a chess book that has, great historical chess games and strategy. I imagine the popularity of the Queen's Gambit is probably circulating through a lot of people's minds about why this show now. And he, in order to kind of ward off insanity, he teaches himself how to play chess, follows the games in this book, and eventually runs out of games in this book and has to create new games for himself. But that creates a problem, because how do you play chess with yourself when you can never surprise yourself? You know exactly what yourself is going to do. So he creates these two dissociative personalities in his head, Mr. White and Mr. Black, who can play the two sides of the chessboard and never know what the other's doing because he has completely fractured his identity. And oh my god, it's around this point that you realize you're watching a metaphor for doing a solo show, which is exactly what we are given here. Like, I thought it was kind of interesting. At one point, the sort of frame breaks and the playwright kind of speaks directly to the audience. He does this a few times where he, says, oh, I had such a hard time coming up with the point. Why does it have to have a point? Why can't it just be an interesting story? But I thought the point was very clear, that he is doing a solo show about solo shows, about the need to fracture identities in this way and actually have dialogue in a space where dialogue seems to be, if not completely inhibited, at least there are obstacles put up for it. And I think this is a good companion piece to The Walk in the Snow, because, again, for the obvious reason, they're both solo shows set during World War II, but whereas Walk in the Snow was pure diegesis, it's just one guy telling you the story, this one was pure mimesis. It was very much living in the world of the story in real time. Sure, it had its meta frame-breaking moments, but for the most part, it really was living in that world. And it even did similar things to Grand Budapest Hotel, of having, layers upon layers of, oh, tell me your story, and then I'll tell you my story. And so for those who've seen Grand Budapest, you can understand that what they're playing with here. And then it gets kind of interestingly meta near the end of having the character, nearly kill himself. Big spoilers here. And this is where we get another one of those frame-breaking moments where the playwright who's playing all the roles kind of talks to us and says, that doesn't happen in the novella, but shortly after submitting the manuscript to this, Stefan Zweig killed himself. So I, unsure how to end my play, felt like this was a spiritual ending. But then he kind of had a change of heart and didn't feel that was right and gave us a very different ending. So I think there was a lot of interesting thing going on here. Unfortunately, we're getting to the second half here, and if I front loaded all the ones that I really love, we're going to get a little more critique in some of these second half ones here. I did as interesting and well done and as dynamic the performance was here, where if I described Walk in the Snow as not boring for a second, this one kind of occasionally my mind wandered and it lost me a little bit, especially during the very long sequences of him slowly going mad in this prison cell, which I guess is understandable that kind of you need to extend these sequences out for as long as they are to really sell that idea of going mad, but I did find that it didn't necessarily grip me as well as I had hoped it was. It also was one of the longer pieces I saw. It was like almost 90 minutes, and I really felt like maybe a tighter version of it could have trimmed some of the fat and really stayed sharp and to the point. So, yeah, not a lukewarm reception, certainly. I did enjoy it a lot overall, but there was some kind of mild critique that we could maybe say about it here.
Awesome. Okay, Ryan, back to you for another one. The next one for you, Ryan, is Iphigenia in Splott, and this was presented by Skipping Stone Theatre. So let's see how this one relates to the last one, because you seem to have a very good job of thematically tying all these pieces together.
It does. I'm doing Ryan Talks About Solo Shows corner right now. Because, yeah.
Back to you, Ryan.
Back to me. Oh no, my brain has to be fractured between talking about these different plays. Okay, so Iphigenia in Splott. I did not know this going in, but Splott is a neighborhood in Cardiff, in Wales. I didn't know that. I don't know anything about Wales.
Go to Wales. It's a beautiful country.
I've never been to Wales. Anyway, certainly never been to Splott. So this is written by Gary Owen, who is a very well-established playwright in the UK. And it is directed by Sean O'Brien and performed, again, it's a solo show, by Brianna Maloney, who played our main character, not Iphigenia, but Effie. So right off the bat, I felt like I knew exactly what I was in for with this one. It is a contemporary reimagining of the ancient Greek legend of Iphigenia, who is probably best known for two plays written by Euripides, Iphigenia in Aulis and Iphigenia in Tauris. But because most people don't really read a lot of the Euripides back catalog, at least not in the theater history survey class that they might have taken in undergrad, most people probably know her from the brief references to her in Agamemnon, because she's a heavy part of that backstory in which, on the way to the Trojan War, Agamemnon had to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia to get the gods to give favorable winds, or else the boats would have never made their way to Troy. And it is this backstory is part of what motivates Clytemnestra to kill Agamemnon when he returns from the war. So that's where most people are familiar with this name and story. But more than anything, I think we are engaging with a rewriting of specifically Iphigenia at Aulis by Euripides, which is where we actually get to see that episode and doesn't exist just in terms of backstory. And here's the thing. I had very mixed feelings about that one, but the more I've thought about it after the fact, the more I liked it, which is good. And I'm glad that we didn't just do this as an immediate review where I had to hastily write a couple paragraphs about it and publish it the night I saw it, because the more I thought about this one, it really did sell me. And I think that's the great thing about this Roundup format, is that it allows us to gestate our thoughts here. Because I feel like I haven't attended a Fringe festival unless I see some contemporary reimagining of a Greek tragedy. That's just part of my jam, and that's what I like going to Fringe festivals for. Well, not just that, but I've always wanted to get one, and there usually always is one in the catalog. But then when I was handed the program and I was looking through it, and I realized just how accomplished this playwright, who I'd never heard of before, Gary Owen, was, I had a weird thought about this. I'm like, oh, this isn't just a contemporary Toronto artist doing their own reimagining about how this particular myth relates to our circumstances in the here and now. This is a very specific, already established adaptation that was written, I believe 2015 it was, and about very specific UK socio-political conditions. And I kind of already went in with, I guess, a little bit of a, not necessarily bad taste in my mouth, but a little, okay, but why do this here? Because, and that's the thing, I think I'm all for and always very enthusiastic about reimagining Greek tragedies, but to do one here that is about not here, about completely different contemporary context, I feel like there has to be a very good reason to do so. And ultimately, I was kind of sold on that reason while watching it because, well, for a few reasons. First of all, it's very well written, and that's the value of having a pre-existing rote-tested play by an established playwright. And the performance by Brianna Maloney was excellent, and she did a great job. She, really sold that accent, which is very prominently featured throughout. But again, while I was watching it, I was thinking, okay, but why not just do a contemporary Toronto socio-political interpretation of this story? But then I guess the second reason why I was starting to get sold on it was because this is not a straightforward adaptation of the Iphigenia story, and my immediate thought while watching it is, why even call it what they titled it? I think at the time, I was feeling that I would have enjoyed it so much more if I wasn't staring at it, trying to draw the connections. I'm like, okay, Lee is Achilles. I get it, okay, but he doesn't act anything like Achilles. I'm frustrated. And that's not me feeling like, oh, this needs to be faithful to the source that's adapting. Obviously, the whole point of adapting this is to deviate from it, but I just felt like it was trying too hard, or I had to try too hard to engender these connections that really weren't very rigid connections. So I was expending too much mental energy on that maybe detracted from the story that I was actually trying to tell, which at the end of the day is about Iphigenia insofar as it is about sacrifice. It is about giving up a part of yourself for an idea of the greater good, knowing that you will never receive the benefits for it, and everyone will always be in your debt, but never know or care. And thematically, that is what this story is about. And I will refrain from going into plot spoilery details about how it executes that, but it is for that reason that this story is called Iphigenia and goes to the trouble to create some connections between itself and this ancient precursor. So I left the theater thinking it was really well done, very well written, very well performed, thematically very coherent, but why would they name it that? It could have been so much better if I wouldn't have even changed a single word other than the title. I would have let all of those connections still be there, but not tell the audience that they should be looking for those connections. Let it be an interesting intertextuality for those who happen to notice it. But then the more I thought about it as the week went on, I thought, okay, what they're doing here is creating a mythic weight and gravitas for this lower class character in a low income suburb, or not suburb, but like urban Welsh environment. And it is using our compulsion, the thing that I was finding frustrating during it, to inscribe this mythic heroism onto this character that maybe elevates the material in a way that it wouldn't have been if it had taken my implicit suggestion of not naming it that. So the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, okay, I see why that is valuable, because at the end of the day, because it doesn't actually, make good on all the connections that it seems to be setting up, I don't know if a lot of people would have been able to kind of lock into that intertextuality the way that I felt like I had, because I knew to look for it, but also remembering that these aren't the plays that a lot of people read in theater school or at all. So at the end of the day, had a bit of a 180 on the parts that I was less excited about, and I really did enjoy this and think it was one of the stronger ones I saw, even if I kind of went in with this little air of suspicion. Sorry, monologue over. But it is a solo show, so it's all about monologues.
Very good. All right, back to me. When another musical, the guy does a musical podcast when it's saw two musicals.
Shocker.
Funny that. Shocker that. So this one was called Billy and the Dreamerz, and it was presented by Dreamerz Development. And the main reason I went and saw it was because on the poster, it toted that they had the original Toronto production, Miss Saigon Kim, May and Lizio in the cast. So I was like, okay, gotta go see her because she's a fantastic singer. And so that was the main selling feature. And they definitely sold it on her name being like part of the poster. Like if you look at the program, it even says like starring her, and then the rest of the cast gets their own cast column. So yeah, this one was a bit more of a mixed bag for me. Like I saw this before I saw Crack of Doom, but then after seeing Crack of Doom, this piece really did kind of show that this was much more of a workshop piece. While I would say Crack of Doom was more of a up on your feet, like ready to go, take it on tour. This piece could definitely use a little bit more TLC. But that being said, the bones of this story about a family immigrating back to England from Australia on the run from the mob, and then going into a very white community, and then everybody who is non-white forming a band and then going on tour with the band, definitely has some really good classic like 80s, 90s kind of band self-discovery story tropes that are really good and well based. So there definitely is a base. And I mean, May Ann was just fantastic. I mean, she had one main song of the show, and I just wanted more of her because she was just such a great singer. And the fact that this piece kind of knew that their main actor, MU, was not a strong singer, but yet they made a joke about that in the show, was a nice kind of thing of them acknowledging that, hey, he's maybe supposed to be the songwriter of the band. He's not meant to be the lead singer, but he kind of fell into the lead singer position, that type of thing. So the fact they acknowledged that in the piece was nice, that they kind of worked with that. I definitely would say the venue didn't help the piece. They were at the ADA Slate Hall, which is a very big kind of venue, almost like a big convention center. So it was too big. Like their projection screen was kind of like a blow up projection screen. Like it was, like it didn't fill the space, so that everything was kind of isolated to being like playing in front of the projection screen, And so I think this piece would have done way better in a place like the Robert Gill Theater. So I don't know if they get to choose where they do their piece, or it's kind of like just Fringe assigns you a venue and you kind of got to work with what you got given.
Yeah.
Fringe assigns a venue, and usually the logistics of the performance dictate, do you get a larger or smaller venue? So if it was a big musical seeming piece, it makes sense that they put it in a larger venue, even if that maybe wasn't the best thing for it.
Yeah, definitely, because it was just too big. Like a definitely a more intimate environment would have done better. But I mean, once again, as I said, the bones are great. The singing was really good. Shout out to Jaden, who plays kind of the love interest of the piece. Also, like the lead keyboard in the band, she did a really good job. Like there were definitely moments I felt you could put a song here. There are moments where when a character gets really angry, like for example, Jaden's character has a crush on Billy, and Billy ends up dating the white blonde mean girl for a little bit of the story. And she has a whole line about like, he would never look at somebody like me because I'm not pretty blonde and white. I'm Asian. I'm not the ideal type that the boys in this area go for. And it was a throwaway line, but I felt like, oh, you could put a song there voicing your frustration, right? Like there's those little moments where my musical dramaturgical brain was like, oh, like you can do a little bit of a tweak here and then it would make it that much stronger. So it definitely is really good bones. And I look forward to seeing how they further develop this piece because they're currently fundraising to continue to develop the piece. Neil Coombs actually was part of the music team for Indecent. So they definitely have great connections and a great creative team behind them. I just think they definitely should do some more workshopping and definitely bring the piece back because I definitely would love to see it further down the development line to see what's changed, what's happened with the piece since this Fringe production. And they did have some projection issues during the show, but the cast never let it stop them. They were really good at just plowing ahead, telling the story. So I definitely say there's definitely some good material here, but definitely, as Jill said, this is more of a workshop piece versus a full-on developed, ready to go on tour piece, as something like a Crack of Doom is. So that's what I'll say about that. Right. Ryan, back to you again.
I saw so many shows. I'm sorry.
I know, Ryan. You were such a good Fringe person. Who just
I love Fringe. It's my favorite time of the year. I love seeing this many
it's
plays.
It's the most wonderful time.
It is. Like for the price of a Mervish ticket, I saw 13 shows, which are like, and not all of them were great. It's a real crapshoot, but that's part of what I love. It's rough around the edges. It's grassroots. It's in the community.
Exactly.
Theater enthusiats.
Exactly.
Go artists. Keep making art.
Exactly. So Ryan, the piece you're going to talk to us about now is called Dreamerz. Nice thematic kind of tie over there.
I will say, Stardust Space is the company. I will say I didn't know where to put this one, so I didn't know anything about Billy and the Dreamerz. I just thought the name sounded similar, so I didn't know if there would be a thematic connection at all. So so the company is called Stardust Space. And according to the main Fringe Festival program, it is performed and created by an artist named Alex, Alyx. There were 2 performers on stage, but the other one wasn't credited in the main Fringe booklet, and they didn't have their own show-specific program. So I sadly do not know the name of this other performer. You did a good job, other performer. I wish I could credit you by name. This was a piece that I was really looking forward to. I thought it sounded really interesting from the description. It was describing itself as I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the booklet in front of me right now, but some kind of Afrofuturist fantasia of visuals and music, and it sounded just like super interesting. It sounded a lot like 21 Black Futures, which a lot of people have recently seen on a CBC Gem. It sounded a lot like a piece that Jill and I actually saw fairly recently when we were in Lisbon called Cosmos, which was a very similar description of this kind of Afrofuturist fantasia type of performance that I enjoyed a lot, but sadly I don't speak Portuguese. So when I saw that performance, that was still very music and visual heavy. There was also quite a bit of dialogue that I felt like I was just completely missing. And as a result, I left that performance thinking like, I feel like that was really good, but I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I understood the language it was in. So when I saw this piece with a very similar description in the Fringe booklet, I'm like, perfect. It's just going to be just like Cosmos, or at least similar to Cosmos, and I'll actually understand it. Unfortunately, and I feel really bad saying this, but I couldn't understand it because I couldn't hear it.
Oh.
And this is a shame. Like our main performer, Alex, did a lot of like rap and poetry and monologuing. Sorry. I'm losing my voice here, folks.
Yeah, wet your whistle. You've been on a marathon.
It's true. You still have another few shows to get through.
I do. While I'm about to speak about someone whose voice I couldn't hear, I'm losing mine. The irony. So Alex, this performer, did a lot of rap and monologues and poetry that I'm sure was great, but the music was too loud and his voice was too quiet. So at the end of the day, I just, quite frankly, as much as I was so excited for this performance and really wanted to hear what he had to say, or they had to say, sorry, I don't specifically know their pronouns, so I will do the cowards they for now. Yeah, I sadly I couldn't hear what was being said. And I had a conversation with someone who had also seen the show after, and they interpreted that, oh, maybe it was a commentary about how Black voices have been muffled throughout history and we can't hear what they say. And I thought that was an interesting interpretation, and I'm inclined to be charitable and say that's what they were going for. But at the end of the day, I think there kind of needs to be a point where we break through that noise and actually do get to hear them. And especially to, if nothing else, to acknowledge the fact that's what they're going for, because unless you are willing to read into it in that way, you will completely miss the message and just think that they didn't have an outside eye who said, hey, the music's too loud, let's turn it down a bit so we can actually hear you. Which is a shame, because I was really expecting great things from this production. And at the end of the performance, Alex did this piece, like a just big thank yous for everyone who helped bring the piece to its feet and supported it along the way. And there was no music in the background of that part, so I could finally hear their voice. And I would have, they clearly have no problems projecting. It was just that the music in behind was so loud. And most of the time they were speaking with a mic that does not seem to have been on. Now, I will say, to be fair, I saw this on opening night, and I hope that if it was not indeed a political statement that we couldn't hear the voices, I do hope that maybe it was a technical difficulty that got resolved after the first performance. And if anybody saw it after opening night, please get in the comments and tell me, because I would like to give that benefit of the doubt. And I really do hope that it was an excellent performance that people really got to experience fully after the fact. And it's just unfortunate that I saw that first one. But yeah, because there was in fact a mic on stage that didn't seem to be working. And I wonder, was that intentional or not? And at the end of the day, with the information I received from this production, I cannot tell. And I feel like that's a problem. So this was sadly a disappointment for me.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to hear that their tech issues were fixed and that other people were able to hear it. But
nothing.
We will see. Comment below. Comment below. All right, Jill, back to you.
Back to
after
me.
A bit of a hiatus there. So
yes,
this piece is, I can read it two ways. It's either 9428 or is it supposed to be read as 9428?
9428.
9428. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have 9428 by Gaussen Theater Company?
Gousset, I would imagine,
Okay.
theater company. And that's actually where I'm going to start us, because this is a theater company that is from Quebec. So I actually have their page open because after seeing this show, I was very interested in what this theater company does. So I'm actually going to share with our listeners the mission of the Gousset Theater Company. The working company is characterized by a willingness to offer highly completed shows artistically. The Theater of Gousset creates texts that are true reflection on life, about art, and texts that focus on contemporary challenges facing humanity, such as war, immigration, etc. And their history, Gousset was given in 2015 the double mission to bring a fresh look at the Iranian translated original text in French and English, to discover the texts of foreign contemporary authors, spectators in Quebec. So the reason why I'm giving all this information is because this piece was an exact embodiment of this company's sort of mission and history. So the story of 9428, basically in a nutshell, our protagonist is a little girl who is just immigrated to Toronto with her mother and father from Iran. And you follow her trajectory of how she is fitting in to life in Toronto and the trials and tribulations and heartache and break of having to leave your home and start anew in a place that is supposedly safe and all welcoming. And it was this another piece that has been percolating with me, and more I catch myself being like, oh, that's what that moment meant. So basically this, bear with me too, because there's several layers to this piece. So our protagonist, we follow her, like I said, she's integrated into school, right? So you meet her friends in school and how that's impacting her sort of fitting in from that perspective. You see her parents have to take on jobs, and because of that, they're taken away from the house. So she's left alone in that regard. She's bullied at school, so she's left alone in that regard. And it was just like such an interesting way of, through the lens of a child immigrating and seeing like loss and loneliness be a theme in this child's life. And this is something, being a white settler myself, I cannot relate to. So there were some parts of the story that I was just absorbing as the audience. And I know this piece would speak differently to other folks, but there was only 4 actors on stage. And actually I entered into the space and they were just standing as the pre-show. The 4 of them were just standing on stage looking out at the audience. And around them was like a border of suitcases. And every time that our protagonist or her parents moved, they always lugged a suitcase with them. And that to me was like such an interesting visualization of like, you have this baggage, you have this luggage, you have this like roving home packed in right the 4 corners of a box following you and lugging it around. So that was like such a beautiful, and you could I was like, this has to be a company from Quebec, because it did remind me I've had the privilege of seeing like to me, like art in Quebec, Montreal art is very different in some regards than other places in the country. It draws a lot from Lecoq, right? So you have a lot of like physicalization, a lot of clown gesturing on top of storytelling that's a bit artsy, almost like a performance art kind of vibe. So again, you're following this trajectory, this heartache for our protagonist kind of finding her footing. But then like sprinkled in, you have the immigration monster basically is played by 2 actors that there's just like such like weird, ominous, like picture like a Tim Burton-esque like drama mask, but like Cheshire Cat vibes. Like it's definitely a piece you'd have to see to just get your own experience. So there was like so many like surreal moments peppered into like this real like coming of age milestone that our protagonist is trying to leap over. And yeah, I just thought it was awesome character work, because every character played different people, and sometimes they were given a voice, but other times they were just given gesture. So again, we've talked about that throughout the night a lot, of storytelling through gesture and how that heightens that, at least me as an audience, a spectator, that heightens my experience. Yeah. So again, this is a piece that it was on the longer side too. I believe this one was about 80. Yeah, it was 80 minutes. So that's the one critique, is I felt it could have been shorter, especially because it wasn't necessarily a through line. A lot of it was vignettes. So our protagonist would actually like narrate what is about to happen, and then they'd go into a scene. So I just felt for Fringe, it was a bit long. And I think, again, this wasn't part of Kids Fest, but it's something that I would love kids and youth to see. And I think this piece could either be spliced into sort of like vignette performances, or kind of rounded out to be a bigger, tighter knit story. Yeah, that's I think where I'm going to leave that one. Because again, this is a piece that I'm going to keep percolating on. So thank you to Goussain Theatre Company for exposing me to your work.
Love it. And Jill, that wraps out your last show discussion. So now you just get to chill and relax.
I'm gonna hold the room. I'm gonna take some water. I'm gonna just absorb your guys' commentary.
Absorb. All right, Jeez. Ryan, back to you though. Once again, for John Who.
John Who. No question mark in the title. It's just John Who.
From Preamble Productions.
Yeah. John Who was neat, is how I'll describe it. I'm not sure if I feel that it completely stuck the landing. Sorry, I'm getting my cards on the table with this one right away before I dive into it, but I'm still thinking about it. So maybe this is going to be another one like Iphigenia and Splott, where, a week goes by and I'm like, oh, I get it now. It makes perfect sense. It's unfortunate that we are recording this when we are before I can fully have, because it was also one of the ones that I saw later in the festival. But giving the benefit of the doubt that maybe the more I gestate on it, the more I will appreciate it. But in the current state of my thought, I feel like it didn't quite hit the mark for me. So this is a piece that is written by Ken Park, who also plays our protagonist, the titular John, although he is not referred to as John Who at any point in the performance. And he plays a playwright who has been tasked by the prestigious Globe Theatre to write a new play on the theme of legacy. It's going to be a whole theme for their season under their new artistic director named Raina, who's a friend of his. And the theme is legacy, and specifically ends and last words. And he is tasked with writing a play as if it's his last one. They compare it to those like last lecture things that like university professors often give, where it's as if you're going to die tomorrow, what would be the wisdom you impart upon to your students? It's like that, but a play. So our character John, who I will say is also played by the writer of this piece, is struggling with the writer's block of how do I put my life and legacy into this play? And he is surrounded by these muses, a bit of a Greek chorus manifesting what we at first think are certain parts of his psyche. And there's 4 of them. Their names are Gray, played by Adrian Griffin, Beth, played by Julia Diane. We have Anne with an E, that'll become important later, played by Blythe Haynes, and Peter, played by Kevin Forrester. And so they all have very distinct personalities, but they also kind of seemed at first to represent elements of a nuclear family, that Gray and Beth are very clearly the parents, and Peter are very much these 2 precocious children. And they kind of represent, at first, it just seems like, oh, they're different parts of his psyche, and they're representing the creative process. And okay, I'm going to say this is one I will have to spoil. I think there's no way to talk about this piece without spoiling it. Then about halfway through the piece, we realize, gradually we come to realize that something's maybe a little off with John, that it's not just that he's struggling to write this play, but his mind doesn't seem to be working as well as he feels like it usually does. And it is seeded early at the beginning that when he was very young, I want to say like 9 or 15 years old, I don't remember specifically, he was in a very bad car accident, and that he was in a coma for a while. But since he's woke up, he's been fine, and he's an adult now. But he is now suffering with a form of early onset dementia, and he is losing his memory, which is making it very difficult to write this play about his legacy, but also maybe puts a much finer point on why it's important for him to put his life's essence into this play, because he might not have the mental capacity or even the lifespan to write another one after this. This might indeed be his last work. And it is also revealed, big spoilers, that his entire family died in this car crash. They were going to Disney World, and he was the only survivor.
Oh my God.
And these other characters, these what we thought were just muses or parts of his fractured psyche, are in fact his mother, father, and 2 siblings, none of whom survived.
Wow.
But what they also are, as is revealed basically at the very end of the piece, and perhaps some people maybe picked up on hints of this earlier. I feel like the hints for some were more obvious than others, but these characters are not also just his family, or not even just his family or the muses, but they are also characters from books, the stories that shaped his love of narrative. Of course, the big obvious one I feel like is Anne with an E, who maybe is revealed to have a bit of an interest in Prince Edward Island. And if you don't know where this is going, you're probably not from Canada or not watching that Netflix show. So she's, Anne of Green Gables. And, the younger brother character Peter is Peter Pan. And the mother Beth is Mackers. I won't say her name in conjunction with that other part, but she also has a proclivity for Scotland. And then Grey, this one that I didn't catch until the very end, he's Gandalf the Grey, and Lord of the Rings. The wise father figure is, of course. So, and this is kind of, after we've already had the reveal about his memory and then the reveal about his family, we get this sort of final reveal of each of the manifestations of the members of his family, read from a very specific book and talk about their relationship to him through this book. And of course, they're the books that their namesakes come from. And I thought this was very interesting, because this story is suddenly not just about how do you tell your life story or tell a meaningful story about your life when you're losing your memory. And this is also something that's very prominent in autobiographical literary studies, and specifically trauma stories, where if a traumatic lapse is something that you literally cannot remember or cannot remember coherently, how do you tell the story about that, especially if you do want to exercise the trauma that comes with this. So what they're saying here is not only are these muses, these manifestations of his family, but they're also the stories that shape him. And I thought that was very interesting. And it was like coming as a good reveal, very close to what I did not realize was the end. And I got to that part like, okay, I get it now. This is starting to get good. And then it ended. And then it just instantly ended. And literally the last line of the play was, "What's next? I don't know. I haven't written it yet." And then it was just over. Which, like, cliffhanger, maybe? I don't imagine there's a sequel to this play coming up in next year's Fringe. But to me, I was finally kind of, after sort of it kind of meandering a lot of the way through it, I was really hoping for, okay, now that the pieces have clicked into place, where's this going? Are we going to get to see the play? What is his legacy? And then just kind of ended on this flat note for me. So again, this is one that I think has a lot of really great things going for it. And I really do want to, wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat and be like, it all makes sense. I get it. I've misjudged this piece. It's a brilliant masterpiece. But right now, I can't in good conscience describe it as such. But I will say that the cast was all very stellar. The muses in particular, they all had these like really great, very well-defined personalities. And most of them, I won't say all of them, but most of them also played other characters or one other character in addition to their muse personas. Two of them, Adrian Griffin and Julia Diane, both played doctors. One was the kind of GP and the other was the neurologist that he visited. Blythe Haynes, I think, had the actual most standout role aside from being Anne the Muse as Raina, the artistic director friend at the not Royal Shakespeare Company, at the Globe. And she did because I felt like she had the most stark contrast between her muse persona and the other character that she played, who was just this very exhausted, frustrated new artistic director who was kind of out of her depths and was really counting on her old playwright friend to really kind of knock one out of the park for her. And then, he has dementia. Oh my God, is my career in jeopardy now? Like, she just, was very sold that role. To my recollection, Kevin Forrester, who played Peter, did not have another character that he played, which, he did very great job in his role of Peter. And this actor, I've seen him before in a farce called False Claims, I believe it was called, a few years ago. And he was the funniest person on stage in that piece. So I felt even though he did a great job as Peter, perhaps as the only supporting member who didn't play a second role and get to show off his range, I felt like he might have been underused. But shout out to Kevin. I saw you in that play a few years ago. That was really good. Yeah, so again, lukewarm reception on this one. And I do hope that the more I think about it, the more I will come to appreciate it. But right now, it kind of just didn't quite do it for me.
Fair. All right. My last review of the day, which is the Sorauren Book Club, which, to be honest, was not on my initial 5-show pass list. This piece came to me thanks to my mother, who was part of 3 different book clubs, and one of the members of her book club recommended the piece. So my mother texted me going, "Do you know anything about a Toronto Fringe festival?" And I was like, "Yes, mother, been going all week." "What is up?" So she's like, "Well, I heard that there's a show that's playing, and would you like to go see it?" I said, "Sure." So I turned up Saturday night, good time. So all 7 of us went. My parents, myself, my 2 sisters, and their partners all went to the show. So we were 7 people within the sold out performance. This piece also won audience pick for their venue. So congrats to them. And it was written by Lisa Randall, directed by Christina Collins Cuban, and Lisa actually also starred as part of the cast as well. So I don't think I'm the target demographic for this. This piece is very much geared toward older women or older people who female identifying audience members. The production company is called The Universe Over 50. And it was great to see these mature performers getting a chance to perform because they were just fantastic. 5 of them all had such great chemistry. You kind of can see 4 of them. There's one person cut off there in the group. They all had such great chemistry. And the fact that the whole piece is about the monthly book club, and the one lady who has decided to withdraw from the book club shows up once again after a major blowout from the last time that resulted in her exile / departure from the group. And it's all about the reconciliation of that while all talking about this book called The Testament of Mary, which I believe is actually a real book, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, it's all about the life of Jesus as told through the eyes of Mary. And as you can imagine, with a book club, there's the one person who hasn't read the book but saw the play. So they can comment. And then there's the other person who is trying to keep everybody on track because it's their pick and they have questions that they want to put out to the discussion. And then there's the person who is trying to keep the peace. Then there's the other person who is Portia, who is the person who is returning to the book club, who is just in kind of an awkward situation there. So it's all about this intergroup dynamic. And I will say the conversations felt very natural. They didn't feel forced or put on. Like all the conversations had a natural flow. Like every time somebody went and got a glass of wine, had a piece of cake, I went and got a cup of tea, that type of thing. Did a really good job of just naturally flowing through that by the time the piece ended after 60 minutes. And they said, oh, our book club is up and over because the husband is coming home. I was like, oh, wow. Like the time actually went by and it felt like a natural book club meeting that I was just kind of casually just sitting in and watching on. I mean, there was a little bit of heightened drama in certain parts of the story that I was like, okay, I can see it. Like, would this actually happen in a real book club? Not necessarily, but they kind of just heightened the drama for the sake of, 60 minutes for a play. But I also say the lighting was really well done because there were subtle moments where the lights got darker in one part of the stage. So a side conversation could be had like a little bit upstage and vice versa. It was all really well done. And those side conversations just naturally blended into the bigger conversation of the night about this particular book and this particular group dynamic. And yeah, it just felt really natural. So a very much natural piece. It really felt like Lisa, who says in her program note, she says, book clubs are a source of community for so many people. We witness each other's ups and downs and dine on each other's lives. My mother shared countless stories of her own book club experiences, as she is one of the few surviving members of a club that has carried each other to life's end, continuing their community of support. So like that was, you definitely felt the heart of this piece was definitely the community and the power of these women together coming kind of forming this sisterhood talking about this book. So very well done. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. This was not a piece that was on my list originally, like when I was going through the catalog of shows there, that one didn't quite stand out to me. But after my mother said, I want to go see it, I said, sure, let's go. Why not? I'm always game for a new piece. And sure enough, it was a lovely experience. And I mean, they were sold out and we got to see their closing performance. And it was very heartfelt. You could see the audience was really into it. There were a few audible gasps. Like one minor spoiler is that one of the characters turns out she slept with another book club member's son because she's a cougar. And now the son is married and is having a child. So there's a bit of that internal drama there of one person knows, another person doesn't know. And that's a whole dynamic of, fun in the group. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was definitely not a piece I would have picked up for myself, but I haven't gone to see it. It was definitely a fun bit of a theatrical fun in a book club. So nice. Very good. Nice. Awesome. Ryan, round us out with your last review.
Take us home.
Dead Broke by Lost Dreams Collective.
Yeah, so this is much like how you just described the last one, Mac. This was also one that wasn't on my original list that, throughout the festival, you run into people you hear talk about what things they've seen, things they're involved with, and I happened to run into Gordon Harper, who is part of the cast of this production. Yeah, Gordon met him fairly recently. He's the partner of Mona Hillis, who was also part of the Rapunzel cast. The Rapunzel cast has had so many tendrils throughout this entire review and Fringe experience.
She's also playing the pigeon in Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus.
Go see the pigeon thing at Witchwood Barns, unrelated to Fringe, TYT Theater. So I ran into Gordon and we were chatting. And he said, oh, I'm in a show. You should come see it. And so that was Dead Broke. And it is written by Will King, who also played the protagonist, Oliver. And the other members of the cast were Courtney Keir, Elle Reimer, correct me in the comments. Who else? Claire Shenstone Harris, and of course, Gordon Harper. So, and is directed by Calvin Peterson. I will say this is the consequence of me front loading all the ones I really liked, is now I seem super down on a bunch of things right at the end. I should have maybe put one that I really liked as the last one. I will say, once again, just like John Who, which I was also lukewarm on, I thought the cast was really great in this. Hey, shout out to you, Gordon, for inviting me to see this one. You did great. Everyone did great, including the playwright, Will King, who plays our main character, and did a great job. The cast really sold it. I specifically highlight Will King because my main issues with this piece were in the writing, and that I will be very diplomatic, or try to be diplomatic, about what I didn't like in it, which means I will have to spoil the piece. So this is a ghost story. We are introduced to our protagonist, Oliver, who was an engineer engineering major who has changed majors to music because that's where his passion is, and is being cut off financially by his parents because of this decision. And he's in a new relationship with his partner, Charlotte, played by Courtney Keir, who says, well, okay, well, while you're sorting yourself out, and need to can't pay rent in your apartment, come live with me. And we'll see if this relationship, this fairly new relationship, will work in that setting. But Oliver is steadfast. He's like, no, I don't want to burden you with myself, while I'm in this state. You didn't sign up for that. Let me make it out on my own. And, still stay together. In fact, that's part of the motivation here. So his solution is that his stoner/drug dealer friend Johnny, played by Gordon, lives next to an abandoned house that's been completely abandoned for a while. Nobody knows what its story is, so Oliver decides that he will squat in this abandoned house, that they rewire electricity from Johnny's house, and that'll be the solution. He'll shower and use the bathroom at the gym at school, and that, this will be the place where he finds his way. And then over the course of this story, it is revealed that the reason why the house is abandoned is because it belonged to a serial killer, and people have been murdered there, and maybe it's haunted. Yes, it is indeed haunted. This is a ghost story, as we realize as we go through it. And so one of our characters, Irina, played by Claire, gets possessed by a ghost, and I don't need to get into the details of the haunting specifically, but shit hits the fan, people die, I won't specify who, and it very clearly feels like it wants to be a metaphor for something. And ghost stories almost always are. I kind of feel like this piece has done something I've never seen before, insofar as it has told a ghost story that seems completely devoid of symbolism, which is odd, because ghosts are always symbolic creatures, metaphors for something. And the play clearly feels like it has themes on its mind, and that it is trying to create thematic connections between what's going on in this protagonist's life and the haunting thing that he finds himself in. But I cannot tell you what those themes are, and I honestly hope it's just because I'm very dense, and maybe that is the case. Again, get in the comments if I'm completely wrong about this. In fact, this is one where I truly would like to sit down and talk to the playwright and kind of talk me through what were you trying to go for here. But the protagonist, okay, fine, I'm going to spoil more things here. He's the sole survivor of this murder house night ghost story thing. And, he helps the ghost achieve her unfinished business, and we don't get to see this because of budget, but the whole house just kind of crumbles upon itself, very Poltergeist. And, it seems like it's resolved, and he reconnects with his partner, Charlotte, who had left the house party early, so wasn't trapped among all the ghosting, but they couldn't get a hold of her during it, so they didn't know if she had been mixed up in it somehow or was in some sort of peril. And as he's kind of, breaking down in front of her and telling her about this horrible thing that happened to him the last night, she's like, that's not funny at all. And I just talked to all of the characters that you claim are dead, and they're very much alive. What are you messing with me? So clearly, this is a metaphor for something. It was not a literal haunting, but there was a lesson to be learned, and it means something. I'm still trying to figure out what, but there's still time left in the play. Maybe it'll all make sense by the end. And then, anyway, they decide, their relationship is in good shape. Clearly, his attempt at finding a new living arrangement didn't work out, so he will, in fact, move in with her. And here, before I say how the play ends, I will read something from the director's note. Director Calvin Peterson wrote this, and again, me struggling to find out, okay, what is this story about? What are the themes? So far, I don't see any connection between the ghost story, the unfinished business, and the actual problems that this protagonist seems to have. They seem very unrelated to each other. I read in the director's note here that this show is about a hard piece of learning, how sometimes we can't do it all ourselves and need to ask for help. If we ignore that fact, we can have disastrous consequences, end quote. So clearly that's what the play thinks it's about. As in, that's what the director sort of latched onto as the big idea theme, that the protagonist needed to learn. And it's, oh, foolish him for not accepting Charlotte's offer to live with her. That's why he ended up in the murder house, and he needed to learn the lesson that he can't go out alone. That makes sense, right? But then the end of the play happens, and as he's having this reconciliation scene with Charlotte, she snaps his neck because she has now been possessed by the ghost.
Damn.
But wait a minute. I thought the lesson he was supposed to learn is to accept help from others and embrace the people in his life. So to end the play with this, oh my god, genuinely shocking plot twist, that undercuts the theme, right? He shouldn't have run back to her and accepted her help because that's what gets him murdered. Am I wrong? I'm asking both of you who've just heard this bare bones plot description and maybe can't comment one way or the other. Will King, playwright, actor of this piece. Am I wrong? I don't know. Get in the comments, get on Instagram that I'll plug badly at the end, and maybe I want to have more discourse about this. I think there is something interesting here. It was a very well performed piece, and the writing was very strong insofar as the scene to scene dialogue tension was. But I genuinely don't know what the piece is trying to do or communicate, and if the theme that the director has locked in on is the theme you're going for. I really feel like that was not handled well. And to me, that just seems like a waste of a perfectly good ghost story. Sorry, Jill, you wanted to say something?
I'm just saying this might be a stretch, but maybe it's kind of to me, because I know, Ryan, you're not as familiar with the genre of horror or thriller. Not
familiar with it
familiar.
Academically. Yeah,
exactly.
Academically, I don't enjoy watching them. Yes.
Whereas I definitely went through a period, and I shouldn't have, because every horror and thriller film is now tattooed to my skull and I have nightmares. But I went through a phase of horror for the sake of horror, right? And just to scare. Me and my roommates back in university, we would just watch scary movies because we just needed that jolt. And so there's part of me that is this just a stage version of a horror movie that its only objective is to scare? Yes, there might be unpackable moments, but it's just to get at that psyche. And then I'm thinking the ending, is it kind of because to me, when you watch anything of what you just described in any horror thriller, there's always survival of the fittest. Fight or flight is the first thing that's always on my mind. I always I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm okay, what would I do in this situation? Would I run? Would I fight? What are the stakes? Whatever. And so it's interesting what you described. It almost makes me think the director's note is sort of setting you up for what can you do in these sorts of situations, or if these situations are as extorted as you just mapped them out to be. There's consequences for every single action and movement, I don't know. It's another percolator, I guess.
It is. I don't feel
and I didn't even say it.
Yeah, I don't feel like my interpretation is incorrect, which is why I'm not as oh man, I really think it'll click in soon, because let's say, sure, that fight or flight maybe is the theme it's going for. Maybe the director's note is a red herring. That's still a good lesson that the director has pointed out here that I've highlighted in orange. So to me, to kind of set up that good lesson, to be oh, but it's not about that, and you can't trust people, and you shouldn't have accepted help from your partner. That, even if that is the intent to throw us off guard in a false sense of security, it just kind of feels wrong. Maybe you shouldn't be kind of communicating that lesson. I don't know, that you really shouldn't trust people and shouldn't open up, especially when I kind of genuinely believe that the director means this sincerely. And that's, I will admit, I don't watch a lot of horror movies because I don't like being scared. I don't want to have nightmares, but I do know a bit about the genre, again, academically, intellectually, and even ones that maybe prioritize this kind of visceral scare content. They're still usually about something Halloween, and most entries of the genre are about the dangers lurking underneath the thin veneer of the suburb and security of the suburbs. I know I don't need to go through every single horror movie.
And please don't, because I'm sitting in a dark room recording this right now. Okay. So I would appreciate it. And we are also turning this review portion into a horror movie in itself. Okay.
I will save you, but I just feel like every horror movie or a horror story, and especially ghost stories, because ghosts are symbolically charged beings, is about something. It's usually about the things we're afraid of, that we repress, that we're afraid to confront. So I guess I just expect more thematically from that type of story, and especially one like this that really felt like it had things on its mind, but then just kind of doesn't stick the landing.
So again, I think before Mac, you take the reins and fully take us home, I think this is a wonderful plug again to bring up the fact of Fringe is also, it's a festival where any piece basically under the sun can come, can be workshopped, can be displayed. Some shows get an afterlife. Some shows are made for the Fringe. And I think I just want to say too, as an artist and an up-and-coming artist too, every Fringe festival is such an amazing opportunity and container for works swathed across the palettes of genre and storytelling, to be brought to our cities. In the summertime, many artists, especially coming out of the pandemic, this is the first Toronto Fringe where pieces are back in real life, up on their feet. So I just personally want to say kudos to all of the artists, the shows that we unfortunately between the three of us were not able to see. I hope your runs went fabulously. And to all of the artists, the volunteers, the crews, the venues, thank you so much for housing the arts in IRL, as the kids are saying again. So
those youths.
Mac, throwing it to you to put our stamp on this episode.
Well, I mean, Jill, you already wrapped it up so nicely. So all I'll say is we have now completed our 23 show review.
Huzzah.
So there we go. Huzzah. Mazel tov. There we go. L'chaim, all that good stuff. So now stay tuned for our next content, which is coming very soon to our 100th episode. So stay tuned for that, because that definitely is coming down the pipeline, as it were, very soon. So you'll definitely want to see what we're doing for that extravaganza. But in the meantime, everybody, stay healthy, stay safe. Ryan, give us that classic Ryan Barakovich send-off that we all love and know.
I'm not going to give the classic one, because I did specifically issue a challenge to some of the artists in this to explain their piece to me, and sure, you can do that in the comments, but if you want a more kind of personal, less public forum, so we don't have to air this out in front of an audience, you can send me a DM on Instagram, which I never use. But if you, a Fringe artist who listened to my critique or praise of your work, wants to reach out to me specifically, I'm at Ryan Barakovich, spelled weird, but you can see it in the description. Yeah, I never use it, but I will make a point of logging in to see if anyone has those comments. Because I love dialogue, and I would like to continue these dialogues. I don't see myself as the authority on what these pieces are or can be. I would love to have these discussions. So one time only, you can find me on social media there.
Oh my goodness.
That is a rare one, Ryan.
The Luddite is coming out of the cave.
I also just don't want friend requests on Facebook from people I don't know personally, so use Instagram.
Fair.
I don't care. I don't use it anyway.
Very good. Very good. All right, Jill, give us your send-off of the day.
Yes, you can follow me at Jillian.Robinson96. And as I mentioned earlier, this is on Instagram, sorry. And as I mentioned earlier in the episode, my brain is a little bit like scrambled eggs. The summer has lifted off. At the time this episode is going out, I would have just finished the first run of 12th Night up in Gravenhurst, which went beautifully. We will be coming back at the end of the summer from August 25th to September 3rd. So if you find yourself in Gravenhurst and you want to catch some live theater on the wharf with a sunset in the back, come see us at the end of the summer. But about the time that this episode is going up, I believe I will be in Calgary rehearsing for Flash, which is, you've seen it on our pages already, a musical written by the lovely Katie Miller and Steve John Dale. And it is a song cycle musical premiering at Calgary Fringe. So again, if you're in Calgary, come see that. There will also be a live stream link that Mac will post there. Again, all this information will be peppered into Jillian.Robinson96, my artist Instagram account. I am so happy that I was able to rattle all that out with the very little brain that I have right now. So that's where I'll leave that.
Love that. You can find me at Mackenzie Horner on all social media platforms. You can follow my antics with all my musical stuff with Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast. We are currently on hiatus for the time being, as we are taking a well-deserved break after doing 3 seasons back to back to back. and we'll hopefully be re-releasing more episodes come September at this point. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, there is a lot to catch up on. There is a whole season's worth of goodies where Jill actually did an appearance on an episode all about Avenue Q. So be sure to check that one out. Woo. Yeah. Other than that, everybody, thank you once again. Thank you to Toronto Fringe for having a great festival this year. And we will see you all in the next episode. Thanks. Bye-bye.